Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn in Overlord and got married to Albedo and Shalltear? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Anomaly at World's End. The end was not a crescendo of roaring flames and earth-shattering power, but a quiet, final exhalation. The warmth that had suffused his entire being, a familiar companion for a lifetime of struggle and triumph, was now a receding tide, pulling away from the shores of his consciousness. He could taste blood, copper and iron, a final, bitter sacrament. The faces of his friends, his family, the people he had sworn to protect, swam before his eyes, their features blurring like watercolors left in the rain. There was no pain, only a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and the gentle, inexorable pull of nothingness. He had given everything, he had saved them all. And now, his watch was over. Naruto Uzumaki, 7th Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village, closed his eyes and let go. Silence. A profound, absolute silence that was more than the absence of sound. It was the absence of everything. Time had no meaning here, space no dimension. He was a mode of awareness adrift in an endless, starless void. Was this death? It was not the reunion with his parents or his master he had half expected, nor the fiery hell his enemies had always wished upon him. It was just empty. He felt a flicker of his old stubbornness, a refusal to simply cease, but there was nothing to push against, nothing to grasp. He drifted, a memory in an ocean of oblivion. Then, a hook. It was not a physical sensation, but something that snagged on the very essence of his soul. A violent, irresistible pull, as if a cosmic fisherman had cast a line into the void and caught the one thing that did not belong. The serene emptiness shattered. He was dragged, tumbling through incomprehensible dimensions, a blur of screaming colors and twisted physics that his mind couldn't process. The sensation was 1-0. Being turned inside out and reassembled at impossible speeds. He felt a wrenching, tearing sensation as he was pulled through a pinprick of light, and then impact. He landed in thick, viscous mud that smelled of rot and decay. The air was heavy, humid, and cloying, thick with the buzz of unseen insects. Above him, a canopy of gnarled, moss-draped trees blotted out a sky filled with constellations he had never seen before. A three-headed moon cast an eerie, silvery glow over the fetid swamp. He pushed himself up, his body groaning in protest. He looked down at his hands. They were solid, calloused, his own. He was wearing the tattered remains of his battle gear, orange and black fabric shredded and stained. He was alive, but where was this? This was not the land of fire. The very energy of the world felt different, thinner, yet tinged with something wild and untamed. He closed his eyes, extending his senses as he had done a million times before. The life energy of the swamp was a chaotic hum, the slow, creeping life of plants, the frantic scurrying of small animals, the predatory patience of things that lurked beneath the murky water. It was all familiar on a basic level, but there was something else. A discordant note in the symphony of life. He focused, pushing his sensory perception further, beyond the confines of the swamp. And then he felt it. It was a mountain of cold, dead energy. So vast and so potent it was like a black hole in the natural world. It was a monument to stillness, to undeath, a construct of immense power devoid of a single spark of genuine life. It made the hairs on his arms stand on end, a primal rejection of its very existence. It was a tomb, and yet, deep within its chilling core, nestled amongst the crushing weight of negative energy, he felt a single, flickering ember. It was not life as he knew it, not the warm chakra of a living being. It was something else, a consciousness, yes, but one defined by a feeling he knew all too well. A feeling that had been his own shadow for the first decade of his life, profound, soul-crushing loneliness. And woven through that loneliness, a new, sharp thread of terror. Whoever, or whatever, was in there, was scared. And alone. Naruto's brow furrowed. His own fatigue, his own disorientation, was momentarily forgotten. A lonely, frightened soul trapped in a place of such immense death. That was a puzzle he couldn't ignore. He took a slow, steadying breath, the strange air filling his lungs. He had died. He was now here. The why and how could wait. Right now, his instincts, honed over a lifetime of protecting the lost and lonely, were screaming at him. He began to walk towards the mountain of cold. Inside the 9th floor of the great tomb of Nazarick, in the opulent throne room, a different kind of end was occurring. It's been fun, everyone. Momonga's voice, filtered through his avatar's skeletal jaw, was empty of inflection, but the sentiment was real. He sat upon the throne of kings, a guild weapon. The staff of Ain's Ul Gown, held firmly in his grasp. Before him, 41 banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, each representing a friend, a comrade, who was now long gone. Below him, the assembled NPCs of his guild, the final creations of his friends, stood in perfect, silent reverence. Albedo, the stunningly beautiful overseer of the floor guardians, stood at his right. Her angelic face a mask of serene loyalty. The other guardians were absent, ordered to their posts in a final act of role-playing nostalgia. He looked at the clock in the corner of his vision. 23 hours 59 minutes and 48 seconds. 12 seconds left. He had stayed until the very end. The game, Yggdrasil, had been his life, his home, his only reprieve from a bleak corporate reality. Now, it was being shut down. He sighed, a sound only he could hear. It was a good run. 23 hours 59 minutes and 55 seconds. He closed his eyes, waiting for the forced logout, for the familiar sight of his drab apartment ceiling. 23 hours 59 minutes and 58 seconds. 23 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds. 0 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds. Ellipsis. 0 hours 0 minutes and 1 second. Ellipsis. 0 hours 0 minutes and 3 seconds. Momonga opened his eyes. He was still here. The throne room had not vanished. The user interface, the menus, the chat logs, they were all gone. But he was still here. A new sensation flooded his senses. Things he hadn't felt in 12 years. The smell of the air, crisp and sterile. The feel of the polished obsidian beneath his gauntlets. It was all real. Then, the voice. Is something wrong, Lord Momonga? It was Albedo, but her voice was not the pre-recorded line he had heard 1,000 times. It was rich, melodious, filled with genuine concern. Her lips, which had never moved before, were parted slightly. Her chest rose and fell with a breath she shouldn't have been able to take. Panic, raw and undiluted, seized him. This was impossible. This was a bug, or a new game. He had to stay calm. He was the guild master of Ain's Ul Gown. He had a role to play. He was the final supreme being. He could not show weakness. Albedo, he began, forcing his voice into a regal baritone he didn't feel. Yes, my lord, she replied, her face flushing with devotion. Touch me. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes widening, before a look of ecstatic joy crossed her features. It would be my greatest pleasure. He tried to check her settings, to open a menu that wasn't there. He remembered his last second, foolish edit to her programming. He had changed her final line, she is a bitch. 2. She is deeply in love with Momonga. A final joke before the end. A joke that was now staring at him with hearts in her eyes. Oh, no, she reached for him, her movements filled with an unholy grace. This was it, the moment where his carefully constructed facade would crumble, where the NPCs would realize he was just a confused salaryman named Suzuki Satoru. And then the universe screamed. It was not a sound. It was a presence. A sudden, titanic flare of energy appeared on the edge of Nazarick's sensory perimeter. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a skill. It was something utterly, fundamentally alien. Every being in Nazarick, from the lowest skeleton guard to Momonga himself, felt it. To them, the denizens of the tomb, their own energy was a cold, dark nebula, a collection of distant, icy stars. This new arrival was a sun. A blazing, brilliant, impossibly vast sun of pure, unadulterated life. It was anathema. It was a cleansing fire that threatened to burn away the very shadows they were made of. It was so potent, so overwhelming, that it momentarily eclipsed the ambient negative energy of the tomb itself. In the throne room, the effect was instantaneous. The ever-present chill in the air vanished, replaced by a strange, invigorating warmth. The oppressive aura of dread that was a permanent fixture of the room was not just suppressed, it was purified, by the sheer magnitude of the positive energy radiating from outside. Albedo froze mid-step, her head snapping towards the direction of the swamp. The adoring look in her eyes was replaced by one of shocked, violent alarm. Her beautiful face twisted into a snarl of protective fury. An intruder, on the sacred lands of Nazarick. Unforgivable. Momonga's panic was washed away by a tidal wave of a new, far greater terror. His internal alert systems, now a part of his very consciousness, were screaming. A red light was flashing in his mind's eye, a warning of a being whose data value was so high it broke the scale. It was listed only as unknown, world-class threat, a world enemy, here, on day 1. No. This can't be happening. A chorus of mental messages, a system he hadn't even known existed until this moment, flooded his mind. Demiurge. Lord Momonga, a phenomenal energy source has manifested. Its nature is unknown, but its scale is absolute. My apologies, I have no other word for it. Shalltear Bloodfallen. Ooh, what is this? It feels delicious, and so very, very strong. Shall I go play with it, Lord Ains? Cocytus. My Lord, a warrior of immense power has appeared. I can feel its spirit from here. Aura and Mare. Lord Momonga. The whole forest just got bright. They were all sentient, all of them, and they were all looking to him for orders. His reefily constructed world had just shattered, and now a cosmic horror had appeared on his doorstep. He had to act. He was Ains Gaun. He could not fail. He forced his panic down, locking it in a mental box. His emotional suppression skill, a passive ability of his Overlord class, kicked in, dousing the flames of his terror with icy calm. It was a blessing. He stood, the staff of Ains Gaun tapping once against the floor. The sound echoed with unnatural authority. Calm yourselves, he commanded. His voice, now devoid of any tremor, boomed through the hall. Albedo immediately fell to one knee. My deepest apologies for my outburst, my lord. There is no need. Your loyalty is commendable. He looked down at her, his mind racing. Information. He needed information. Sending a guardian was too risky. This thing could be a player killer of unimaginable skill. But he couldn't do nothing. Sebas, he called out, his voice resonating with power. From the shadows near the throne, the elderly, impeccably dressed butler materialized, kneeling instantly. Lord Momonga, I await your command. Take the Pleiades, Ains ordered, his mind settling on a course of action. Sebas was strong, level 100. But his true value was his calm demeanor and perception. He was the perfect diplomat, or scout. Go to the source of this disturbance. Your mission is reconnaissance only. Ascertain the nature and identity of this being. Do not, under any circumstances, engage in hostilities unless you are attacked first. Is that clear? As clear as the light of your wisdom, my lord, Sebas replied, his voice a smooth baritone. This being's power is beyond anything we have ever recorded. Approach with the utmost caution. If it is hostile, retreat immediately. The preservation of Nazarick is paramount. He was talking to Sebas, but also to himself, reinforcing his decision. It shall be done, my lord. With a bow so deep his head nearly touched the floor, Sebastien vanished back into the shadows as silently as he had appeared. Ains sat back down on the throne, the cold stone a small comfort. He looked at the kneeling Albedo, at the vast, empty hall, and then his mind's eye turned back to the monstrous, sun-like signature on his mental map. A single, terrified thought cut through his forced composure. What in the hell have I gotten myself into? Naruto stopped at the edge of the sprawling swamp. Before him, the terrain rose sharply, giving way to a strange, barren landscape dominated by what looked like a cluster of ancient mausoleums surrounded by a high wall. This had to be the source of the cold energy. He could feel it emanating in waves, a palpable chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He also felt the approach of others. 7 distinct signatures, moving with disciplined speed. 6 of them felt manufactured. Like puppets given life, their energy signatures clean, simple, and identical in nature. But the 7th was different. It was as cold and lifeless as the tomb itself. Yet it possessed a core of immense physical power, refined and controlled. A warrior. An old, powerful one. He didn't hide. There was no point. They already knew he was here. He cool. D feel their attention focused on him like a spotlight. Instead, he simply stood, hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed, and waited. A moment later, they emerged from the trees. 6 women in various styles of maid uniforms, each armed with a strange weapon. They moved with an eerie, synchronized grace that spoke of relentless training. But his eyes were drawn to the one who led them. An elderly man with a sharp, hawk-like face and a pristine white beard, dressed in a butler's uniform that seemed utterly out of place in the wilderness. His bearing was ramrod straight, his hands clasped politely behind his back. He radiated a quiet, dignified power that Naruto recognized instantly. This was a man who had mastered his craft to its absolute peak. The group stopped a respectful 50 yards away. The butler, Sebas, took a single step forward, his eyes scanning Naruto from head to toe. His gaze was not hostile, but intensely analytical. And, to Naruto's senses, deeply, deeply wary. Sebas, Tien had served the supreme beings for his entire existence. He knew power. He had stood in the presence of beings who could shatter reality with a word. Lord Momonga, touch me, Ulbert Elan Odal, they. Our strength was the foundation of his world. The man standing before him was something else entirely. It wasn't just the sheer scale of his energy. Sebas could feel that from inside the tomb, a raging inferno of life that defied comprehension. It was the quality of it. Up close, it wasn't threatening. It was nourishing. The decaying swamp around the man seemed less foul. The air felt cleaner, fresher. It was like standing next to the concept of life itself, personified. And yet, beneath that placid surface, Sebas could sense a coiled reservoir of power so vast that if it were unleashed, it would not just destroy him and the Pleiades, it would likely scour this entire region from the face of the planet. To fight this being would be like a candle trying to fight the sun. It was not a battle, it was an act of self-immolation. Lord Momonga's orders had been clear: do not engage. Sebas now understood that this was not merely a caution. It was a command for survival. He bowed low, a perfect 90-degree angle from the waist. Greetings. I am Sebas Tien. I serve the master of this domain, the great tomb of Nazarick. Naruto raised an eyebrow. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the otherworldly tension in the air. Naruto Uzumaki. And I've got no idea where that is. He gestured vaguely at the mausoleums behind Sebas. I take it you mean that place. Smells like a graveyard. Sebas straightened, his expression unreadable. It is the home of my master, Lord Momonga, one of the 41 supreme beings. The title was an automatic defense, a declaration of the power he served. Naruto's gaze sharpened. Supreme beings. That's a lofty title. He took a step forward, the mud squelching under his worn sandals. The Pleiades tensed, their hands tightening on their weapons, but Sebas made a calming gesture they instantly obeyed. Naruto stopped. I felt something from inside your tomb. One person. Scared. Is that your Lord Momonga? Sebas's composure almost broke. This being. He could sense the emotional state of the Supreme One from this distance. Impossible. Lord Momonga was the pinnacle of existence, a being beyond such mortal frailties as fear. And yet, the butler's OWN senses had detected the tremor of anxiety in his master's voice when he gave the order. Our Lord is supreme in all things, Sebas replied, his voice perfectly even. He was merely surprised by your sudden and powerful arrival. He has sent me to extend his greetings and to invite you to his throne room, so that your intentions may be known. It was a test, an invitation, but also a demand. Naruto considered it. He was outnumbered, in a strange land, facing a fortress of unknown power. But his senses told him the one in charge was the frightened soul in the center. Going to the source was the fastest way to get answers. And besides, if they wanted a fight, they would have started one already. This caution, this formal invitation, told him they were just as wary of him as he was of their strange, dead energy. All right, Butler-san, Naruto said with a nod. Lead the way. I've got a few questions for your supreme being. Sebas bowed again, a flicker of relief passing through him so quickly it was almost imperceptible. If you would be so kind as to follow me, Naruto-sama. He turned and began the walk back, the Pleiades falling into formation around Naruto, keeping a cautious distance. They escorted him not as a prisoner, but as one might escort a live, uncaged typhoon, hoping it didn't decide to change direction. Naruto walked with them, his eyes taking in everything, his mind a whirlwind of questions. This was no genjutsu. This was real, and it was getting stranger by the second. The journey through the Great Tomb of Nazarick was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The sheer opulence was staggering. Corridors of polished marble, ceilings inlaid with gold and precious jewels, statues of demonic and angelic figures that seemed to watch him as he passed. The air was frigid, still, and heavy with a palpable sense of dread and negative energy that would have crippled a lesser man. Naruto, however, was unfazed by the spectacle. He had seen palaces. He had seen fortresses. This was just bigger, colder. What interested him was the life, or lack thereof. Skeletons in ornate armor stood guard, their eye sockets glowing with faint red light. Golems of obsidian patrolled silent hallways. Every being he passed was a construct, an unliving thing animated by the cold, alien power that permeated this place. He was being watched. He could feel hundreds, thousands of eyes on him from behind walls and down darkened corridors. He could sense their energy signatures: demons, insects, undead, dragons, a menagerie of powerful, unnatural beings, all held in check, all waiting. They were all part of the same collective, the same cold mountain of energy. And they were all, on some level, afraid of him. Afraid of the vibrant, living sun that had walked into their tomb of shadows. Finally, they reached a pair of colossal, ornate doors guarded by two massive, heavily armored warriors that radiated an aura of immense physical might. The doors swung open silently, revealing the throne room. The scale was breathtaking, a vast, vaulted chamber that could have held a small army. Banners of forgotten sigils hung from the ceiling. At the far end, atop a short flight of steps, sat the throne of kings. And upon it, a figure that made even the monstrous guards outside seem mundane. It was a lich, an overlord, a majestic skeleton of impossible size, clad in elaborate, RK academic robes adorned with gold and violet trim. A halo of dark light pulsed behind its head, and in its bony hand, it held a twisted golden staff that writhed with a power of its own. Red pinprick, KS of malevolent light burned in its empty eye sockets, fixed directly on him. This was the source. This was the frightened, lonely soul he had sensed from the swamp. The contrast between the immense, terrifying power the lich projected and the tiny, shivering ember of consciousness Naruto could feel within it was staggering. Lining the steps below the throne were the most powerful beings he had sensed yet. The beautiful, winged woman with black horns from before. A petite girl in a frilly gothic dress, holding a crimson parasol. A towering, insectoid creature covered in icy armor, breathing frost. A dark elf child in boy's clothing, looking nervous, next to a matching girl with an eye patch. And a man in a sharp red suit with a reptilian tail, a cruel, intelligent smirk on his face. The floor guardians, the pillars of this tomb. They were all staring at him, a mixture of awe, hostility, and intense curiosity on their faces. The tension in the room was so thick he could have cut it with a kunai. Sebas and the Pleiades knelt, moving to the side of the room. Naruto walked forward, his footsteps the only sound, stopping in the center of the vast chamber. He met the lich's gaze, ignoring the assembled guardians. The lich, Momonga, now Ain's gown, gripped his staff. The performance of his unlife was about to begin. "Welcome, traveler, to the Great Tomb of Nazarick," Ain's voice boomed. Magically enhanced to fill every corner of the room. "I am Ain's gown, master of this domain. You have entered my lands unbidden. State your name and your purpose." Naruto didn't bow, he didn't kneel, he simply stood, hands now out of his pockets, relaxed at his sides. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki," he said, his voice clear and carrying easily without any magic. "As for my purpose, I was just hoping you could tell me where the hell I am. This definitely isn't home." The casual, almost disrespectful tone sent a ripple of shock through the guardians. The one in the red suit, Demiurge, took a half step forward. His smirk replaced by a scowl, but a subtle gesture from Ain's froze him in place. Ain's leaned forward slightly. This was not going as he had rehearsed in his mind. The being was not intimidated. He was not arrogant. He was conversational. It was deeply unsettling. "You are in the Re-Esti's kingdom," on the continent of, Ains began, rattling off the information he had gleaned from his remote viewing spells. Naruto held up a hand, cutting him off. Names I don't recognize. Not helpful. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Ains's. Let's try a different question. Who are you? Not the fancy title. You. His voice was soft, but it cut through the immense hall. I felt you from miles away. Hiding in all this, death. Scared and alone. What's a guy like you doing in a place like this? Silence. The floor guardians stared, utterly aghast. Albedo's wings flared in outrage. Shalltear giggled, a dangerous, predatory sound. Cocytus gripped his halberd. No one had ever spoken to their supreme lord with such impertinence. To imply he was scared. It was the ultimate blasphemy. Ains's mind went blank with pure, unadulterated panic. He's seen through me. He knows. The lie is over. The emotional suppressor kicked in again, a welcome wave of ice washing over his terror. He forced himself to process the words. He felt my fear. From that distance. What kind of being was this? The oppressive negative aura of the throne room, a conscious projection of Ains's own power and the tomb's nature, intensified. The shadows deepened. The air grew colder, heavy with the despair of 1,000 tortured souls. It was a passive ability, but now, fueled by his stress, it was becoming an active weapon, designed to crush the spirit of any who stood before him. For Naruto, it was like a suffocating blanket had been thrown over him. The air grew thick, heavy with sorrow, fear, and hopelessness. It was a vile, choking sensation, anathema to his very core. He felt his own energy recoiling from it, his sage mode instincts flaring in self-defense. Without a conscious thought, he reacted. He didn't move. He didn't form a hand sign. He just was. A gentle, silent pulse of his own chakra radiated outwards from his body. It wasn't an attack. It was an affirmation of his own existence, a statement of life in the face of death. A golden, almost imperceptible shimmer filled the air. The effect was immediate and profound. The crushing despair vanished, not just countered, but obliterated. The supernatural cold was replaced by a gentle, soothing warmth, like the first rays of dawn after a long, cold night. The deep, menacing shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shrink back, their edges softened. The very stones of the hall, saturated with millennia of negative energy, felt clean. For the floor guardians, the sensation was utterly alien. They had existed their entire lives in the cold, glorious shadow of Nazarick. This feeling, this vibrant, pure, life-affirming warmth, it was not painful. It wasn't holy magic, which seared their undead and demonic flesh. It was something else. It was like a blind man seeing color for the first time. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was sublime. Albedo stared, her mouth slightly agape, her fury forgotten. Shalltear's predatory grin had faded, replaced by a look of wide-eyed, fascinated wonder. Demiurge's analytical mind ground to a halt, unable to categorize or explain what had just happened. This was not magic. This was not a skill. This was a fundamental rewriting of their environment by sheer force of will. Ains felt it most of all. The golden energy washed over him, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, he felt the loneliness and fear he kept so tightly suppressed not just calmed, but touched. Soothed. It felt nice, and that scared him more than anything else. This being, this Naruto Uzumaki, had just effortlessly purified the sanctum sanctorum of the great tomb of Nazarick with his mere presence. He hadn't even looked like he was trying. Ains's mind, now crystal clear from the emotional suppression, raced through the logical outcomes. To fight this man was not just suicide. It was an impossibility. He was a walking, talking world-class item, a being who operated on a level of reality that their tiered magic system couldn't even comprehend. Making an enemy of him would be the end of Nazarick before it had even begun. Ejecting him was just as bad. A god-tier entity would know their location and their nature. That left only one option. A mad, desperate gambit. But it was the only one. He rose from the throne, his full, intimidating height on display. The staff of Ains Ulgown struck the floor with a resounding clang that echoed with finality. "You are not from this world," Ains declared, his voice a pronouncement of absolute certainty. The guardians snapped to attention, their focus shifting back to their master. "Took you long enough to figure that out," Naruto replied, his stance still relaxed. Ains ignored the remark. He raised his free hand, pointing not at Naruto, but to the empty space beside his throne. You are not an enemy, he boomed. Your arrival was foretold. It was said that in our moment of greatest need, the last of our number would arrive. He was spinning a lie, a grand, beautiful lie woven from desperation and strategic brilliance. He had to frame this anomaly in a way his fanatically loyal children could understand. Beings of Nazareth, he called out, your eyes do not deceive you. This is no intruder. This is one of us. A supreme being, who has journeyed through time and space to rejoin us at long last. The declaration hung in the supernaturally silent air. The floor guardians stared, their minds reeling. Another supreme being, here, now. It was a miracle. It was the fulfillment of a prayer they didn't even know they had. Ains descended the steps, his robe sweeping behind him. He stopped directly in front of Naruto, the two of the perfect contrast. The towering skeleton lord of death and the human-sized incarnation of life. Your memory may be fragmented from your long journey, my friend, Ains said, his voice dropping to a more conspiratorial, yet still regal tone. But you are home. We have waited for you. He was offering Naruto a role, an identity, a place. He was bringing the typhoon inside the house and calling it family. Naruto looked into the burning red lights of Ains's eyes. He saw the calculation. He saw the brilliant, desperate lie. And he saw the shivering soul underneath it all, a man playing a role he was not prepared for. Trying to protect the only thing he had left. He saw a mirror, twisted and strange, of his own life, of having to become a symbol, a leader, a legend, when all he wanted was to be accepted. He could expose the lie. He could fight. He could leave. Or, he could play along. For now, he was alone in a new world. An alliance with the strongest power he had yet encountered, even one as strange and unsettling as this, was the most logical move. And besides, his curiosity was piqued. A slow grin spread across Naruto's face, the first genuine smile he'd had since arriving. It was the smile of a man who understood the game and was willing to play. It's been a long trip, Naruto said, his voice carrying the weight of a truth Ains couldn't possibly understand. It's good to be back, Ains Ulgown. A collective gasp went through the Guardians. He knew the name. The lie was cemented. It was true. Ains's internal monologue was a silent, unending scream of, it worked. It actually worked, but outwardly. He simply nodded, a gesture of solemn welcome. Indeed it is, he said. He turned to the assembled Guardians, who were now looking at Naruto with expressions of pure, unadulterated worship. Albedo and Shalltear, in particular, were staring at him with a newfound, feverish intensity. They now had not one, but two gods to adore. Let it be known. Ains's voice thundered through the hall. A declaration that would echo through the coming ages. The great tomb of Nazareth is complete once more. All hail the supreme beings. The floor guardians, as one, dropped to their knees. Their heads bowed in absolute submission. All hail Lord Ains and Lord Naruto. Their voices roared in perfect, fanatical unison. Naruto stood beside the skeletal king, bathed in the adulation of monsters. A living sun in a tomb of eternal night. He had no idea what he had just agreed to, but one thing was certain. His life, his second life, was about to get very, very interesting. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Sun in the Village. The roar of fealty echoed, a tidal wave of sound born from monstrous throats that shook the very foundations of the throne room. All hail Lord Ains and Lord Naruto. The words hammered into Naruto, not with physical force, but with the sheer weight of their fanatical belief. He stood beside the skeletal overlord, a sudden and unwilling partner in godhood, feeling the gazes of the kneeling guardians like physical things. There was Albedo, her face, previously a mask of fury, now alight with a fervent, ecstatic glow. There was Shalltear, the gothic doll, whose predatory curiosity had transmuted into wide-eyed, shimmering adoration. There was Demiurge, the archdevil, whose sharp intelligence was now aimed at calculating the strategic boons of this development. It was all a lie. A brilliant, desperate, and utterly effective lie. And he had just agreed to be the centerpiece of it. Ains, for his part, played the role of the magnanimous king to perfection. Rise, my loyal guardians. He commanded, his voice imbued with a power that left no room for disobedience. As they stood, their attention remained divided, flicking between the familiar skeletal form of their creator and the strange, vibrant man who now stood as his equal. Ains turned his head slightly, the red points of light in his sockets fixing on Naruto. My friend. His voice was a low rumble, meant for Naruto alone, yet still carrying the regal affectation. We have much to discuss. Matters of state. Let us retire to a more private setting. It was a statement, not a request. Ains was already moving, his robe sweeping gracefully as he led the way from the dais. Naruto fell into step beside him. He could feel Ains's internal state, a frantic buzzing of high-strung nerves barely contained by the icy shell of his undead passivity. The being was a walking contradiction, a god-king terrified of his own shadow. A word, my lords, Albedo interjected, stepping forward with a grace that was both angelic and predatory. Her eyes, golden and molten, were fixed on Naruto. As overseer, I must insist on accompanying you. The security of the supreme beings is my sacred duty. Her gaze lingered, intense and probing, as if trying to memorize every detail of this new, unexpected deity. Before Naruto could respond, Ains answered smoothly, your devotion is a jewel in Nazarik's crown, Albedo. However, this is a conversation between old comrades. We will be in the treasury. None are to disturb us. The finality in his tone was absolute. Albedo bowed her head, a flicker of disappointment crossing her features before being replaced by perfect obedience. As you command, Lord Ains. Ains led Naruto through a shimmering portal that materialized in the air, a swirling vortex of purple and black energy. They stepped through, and the opulent dread of the throne room was replaced by an even more outrageous spectacle. They stood in a cavernous vault so vast it seemed to defy physics, filled with mountains. Not mountains of rock, but mountains of gold coins, shimmering rivers of jewels, and towering stacks of enchanted armor and legendary weapons that pulsed with latent power. Impressive, Naruto said, his voice flat. He'd seen wealth before, it meant little to him. A mere collection of trinkets from a bygone era, Ains said dismissively, the lie easy on his non-existent lips. Inside, Suzuki Satoru was screaming, he's not impressed. This is the entire treasury of Ains Gown. This is the culmination of years of our lives. The emotional suppressor kicked in, a familiar and welcome numbness. Ains gestured to a simple, unadorned stone bench that seemed wildly out of place amidst the glittering hoard. Please. Naruto sat. Ains remained standing, a towering silhouette, TTE against the gleam of a billion gold pieces. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. All right, Naruto began, breaking the quiet. The show's over. Let's drop the old friends act. You lied to them. Ains's crimson eyes seemed to narrow. I did what was necessary to ensure the stability of Nazarik and the safety of its denizens. You were scared, Naruto stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. You saw something you couldn't control, something you didn't understand, and you improvised. It was a good move. Smart. But it's a lie, and lies have a way of falling apart. It will not fall apart, Ains countered, his grip tightening on his staff. They believe. Their faith is absolute. As long as you and I maintain the narrative, it is, for all intents and purposes, the truth. Faith based on a lie is a shaky foundation to build a kingdom on. Bone Man, Naruto said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. I've seen it happen. It ends in betrayal and bloodshed. My name is Ains Gown, he corrected, a hint of steel in his voice. And you underestimate my children. Their loyalty is not a fleeting emotion. It is coded into the very fiber of their being. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Coded. You talk about them like they're puppets. They are creations, Ains said, the words feeling hollow even to him now that Albedo's living, breathing devotion was so fresh in his memory. Designed by my friends, my comrades, to be perfect in their roles. He decided to pivot. He needed to seize control of the conversation. But that is a matter for another time. We have a more pressing concern. We are in an unknown world, surrounded by potential enemies. We need information. We need to understand the power structures, the native species, the level of this world's strongest warriors. He raised a hand, and a square of shimmering, dark energy materialized in the air between them. It was the mirror of remote viewing. An image flickered into existence within its frame. Blurry at first, then sharpening to a bird's-eye view of a small, rustic village nestled at the edge of a vast forest. It was Carne Village. I have located a nearby settlement, Ains explained, his voice returning to that of a confident commander. It is about to be attacked by soldiers from what I believe is a local religious nation, the Slain Theocracy. Naruto's eyes narrowed, his attention drawn to the image. He could see the villagers, their forms tiny from this height, moving with frantic energy. He could feel their fear, a faint but sharp tang on the edge of his senses. They are weak, Ains continued, his tone purely analytical. Commoners. No discernible skills or magic. The attacking soldiers, however, possess low-tier magic and summon creatures. They will be slaughtered, so we help them, Naruto said simply, as if it were the only possible conclusion. Ains paused. In a sense, I have a plan. It will be a controlled experiment. I will provide the villagers with a low-tier defensive item, one of the countless baubles we paid little mind to in Yggdrasil. We will observe. If the item is sufficient to repel the attack, we learn about the relative power level of this world's military. If it is not, we learn the same lesson, and the village is destroyed. Either outcome provides us with valuable data at minimal risk to ourselves. Naruto stared at Ains, his expression hardening. The casual, detached way Ains spoke of the villagers, potential annihilation, as an acceptable loss, a data point, struck a chord of deep, resonant anger within him. It was the voice of every callous leader, every detached daimyo he had ever fought against, the ones who saw people as pawns on a board. No, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. Ains tilted his head. I beg your pardon. I said, no. Naruto stood up, his vibrant, living energy flaring for a moment, causing the piles of gold around him to shimmer and the air to warm. They're not data points. They're not an acceptable loss. They're people. Scared people, about to be killed. You don't experiment with their lives. Your sentimentality is, noted, Ains said, the emotional oppressor working overtime to quell a surge of irritation. But you are thinking like an individual, not a ruler. A king cannot risk his kingdom for a handful of peasants. Our priority is the security of Nazarick. We cannot reveal our strength recklessly. And a king who won't protect his people isn't a king at all. Naruto shot back, his eyes flashing. He's just a tyrant hiding in a castle. You think I don't know about making hard choices? I've sent friends to their deaths for the sake of my village. I've made decisions that have cost lives. But I have never, not once, treated a single life as disposable. Every single one matters. The conviction in his voice was absolute, a force of nature in itself. It was the voice of a Hokage, a leader who had earned his position not through birthright or overwhelming power alone, but through the genuine love and respect of his people. Ains was taken aback. This was not the simple-minded brawler he had half expected. This was a clash of fundamental ideologies. Ains, the pragmatic, paranoid gamer, saw the world as a hostile, high-level zone to be cautiously explored. Naruto, the battle-hardened savior, saw a world full of people who needed protecting. I will not allow it, Ains stated, his voice dropping an octave, a clear threat. You will not endanger Nazarick. You can't stop me, Naruto replied, his gaze unwavering. You know it, and I know it. You can sit here on your mountain of gold and watch them die, but I'm going. And if your children have a problem with it, they can take it up with me. He turned to leave. Ains felt a surge of pure panic. This was his worst-case scenario. The anomaly was going rogue. If he left, the lie was exposed. If he tried to force him to stay, it would mean a fight he knew, with chilling certainty, he could not win. He had to adapt. He had to reframe it. He had to make it his idea. Stop, Ains commanded. Naruto paused, looking back over his shoulder. Ains's mind raced, spinning the situation with the speed of a supercomputer. You are correct. A show of force is necessary. But you will not go alone. He raised his voice, calling out into the empty treasury. Albedo. A shimmering gate opened instantly. And Albedo stepped through, immediately kneeling. Lord Ains, you called for me. Her eyes darted to Naruto, a flicker of concern in their depths. Our new comrade, Lord Naruto, has decided to personally intervene in the coming conflict, Ains announced, his tone making it sound like a preordained plan. He wishes to gauge the strength of the natives firsthand. You will accompany him. Your mission is to ensure his safety and to observe everything. You are my eyes and ears. Report everything you see. Albedo's face lit up. A mission, personally assigned by her beloved Lord Ains. To accompany the mysterious and powerful new Lord Naruto. It was an honor beyond measure. It will be my supreme pleasure, my lords. I will protect Lord Naruto with my very life. Naruto just shook his head slightly, a small, wry smile on his face. Clever, Bone Man, very clever. Ains had found a way to maintain his authority, place a powerful spy on him, and turn Naruto's own moral crusade into a reconnaissance mission for Nazarick. He was seeding the battle to win the war of appearances. Fine, Naruto said, looking at Albedo. Let's go. People are dying. Without another word, he walked towards the portal. Albedo cast one last adoring look at Ains before rising and following Naruto, her expression a mixture of zealous duty and profound curiosity. As they stepped through the gate, Z was left alone in the glittering silence of his treasury, the image of the village still hanging in the air. Damn it, the Sorcerer King whispered to himself, the sound utterly human. Damn it, damn it, damn it. The air outside Nazarick was cool and crisp. The triple moon was high in the sky, casting long shadows from the gnarled trees. Naruto moved with a loping, ground-eating stride, his senses pushed out, scanning the forest ahead. Albedo walked beside him, her armored heels barely making a sound on the soft earth. The silence between them was thick with unspoken tension. She was studying him. He could feel her gaze. Analytical and intense, she was trying to reconcile the being her lord had presented, a long-lost supreme being, a god of Nazarick, with the man walking beside her. He was dressed in tattered rags. His demeanor was casual, almost brusque, and he had openly contradicted Lord Ains. It was a puzzle her programmed mind struggled to solve. You disapprove, Naruto said, not looking at her. Albedo stiffened. I do not understand the question, Lord Naruto. My feelings are irrelevant. I have my orders from Lord Ains. That's not what I asked, he pressed, his pace not slowing. I asked what you think. Do you think it's right to leave those villagers to die? She was clearly taken aback. No one had ever asked for her opinion on a moral matter. Her morality was an extensi. On of Nazarick's will. What is good for Nazarick is good. What is bad for Nazarick is bad. The lives of lesser beings are of no consequence when weighed against the security of the great tomb of Nazarick and the supreme beings. She recited, the words sounding like they were pulled from a textbook. So if Ains ordered you to kill a baby, you'd do it. Without question, without hesitation, she replied instantly. A fierce pride in her voice. My will is Lord Ains's will. To serve him is the very purpose of my existence. Naruto stopped, turning to face her fully. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of her face. Her otherworldly beauty. That's it. That's all you are. An order-taking machine. The question struck her. It was dismissive, not of her power, but of her identity. I am the O.V. Ursur of the Floor Guardians of the Great Tomb of Nazarick. She declared, her wings flaring slightly in indignation. My power is second only to the supreme beings. I am not a mere machine. Then prove it, Naruto challenged. His voice softening slightly. Ains isn't here. I'm asking you, Albedo. Forget your orders. Forget your programming. What do you, the person standing in front of me, believe is the right thing to do? Her mouth opened, then closed. She had no answer. The concept was utterly alien. Her entire world was built on a framework of loyalty and hierarchy. The idea of a personal belief separate from that of her creator was a logical paradox. Her brow furrowed in genuine confusion and a hint of distress. Naruto saw her struggle. He sighed, shaking his head. Never mind. We don't have time. He turned and broke into a run, his speed a sudden, shocking blur. Albedo's eyes widened. She was a level 100 warrior, but his pure physical speed was astonishing. With a graceful flap of her black wings, she launched into the air, easily keeping pace above him. She watched him move, a streak of orange and black weaving through the dense forest with an instinctual grace that no knight could match. He wasn't just running. He was flowing with the terrain, a part of the natural world in a way no denizen of Nazarick could ever be. The puzzle of Naruto Uzumaki just grew more complex. They arrived at the outskirts of Karne village in minutes. The scene was one of barely contained panic. Men with pitchforks and hunting bows stood in a trembling line, their faces pale with terror. Women and children were huddled in the center of the village, their sobs carried on the night wind. And approaching from the fields, an organized company of knights on horseback. They wore shining, silver armor and white surcoats emblazoned with a sunburst emblem. At their head, a man with a cruel face and a ridiculously large mitre sat upon a gilded palanquin carried by sweating acolytes. The sunlight scripture, Albedo murmured from the air, her voice a low growl. Zealots of the slain theocracy. Pathetic, but their faith-based magic can be an annoyance. Naruto ignored her, his eyes on the villagers. He saw a young girl, no older than Konohamaru's little sister, trying to comfort her even younger sibling. He saw the grim, determined face of a man who knew he was about to die but stood his ground to protect his family. He had seen this scene 100 times before, and he knew how it had to end. He walked out from the trees, into the open space between the village and the approaching knights. He just stood there, a lone figure in tattered clothes, his hands in his pockets. The leader of the knights, Nigan Grid Lewin, saw him and scoffed. And what is this? Did they send their village idiot out to greet us? His men laughed, the sound harsh and arrogant. Step aside, fool, unless you wish to be trampled under the righteous march of our faith. Naruto didn't move. This is your only warning, he said, his voice calm but carrying with unnatural clarity across the field. Turn around and go home. Nigan's face darkened with fury. The impertinence. You dare give orders to the captain of the sunlight scripture. You have forfeited your life. Summon them. Let this fool be the first to be purified by the glory of the gods. Behind him, his casters began to chant. Circles of light appeared on the ground, and from them rose shining, angelic figures. They had golden halos, pristine white wings, and featureless faces. They were archangel flames, mid-tier summons that were the scripture's pride and joy. Albedo, still hovering, felt a prickle of discomfort. As a demon, holy energy was poison to her. These were weak, but a dozen of them could be painful. She prepared to descend, to incinerate them with a blast of unholy darkness as ordered by Lord Ains. But Naruto acted first. As the angels raised their flaming swords, he moved. He simply raised one hand, palm out. An invisible, shimmering wall of energy erupted around him and expanded, washing over the terrified villagers behind him. It wasn't a jutsu she recognized. It was pure, raw chakra, molded into a defensive barrier. One of the angels swung its sword at him, and the holy fire splashed against the barrier, dissipating into harmless sparks. Naruto looked back at Albedo. Stay out of this, he said. This light's not good for you. He was protecting her. Her, a guardian of Nazarick. From these pathetic summons, the thought was so bizarre, so completely inverted from the natural order of things, that she could only stare. Naruto turned back to the angels. My turn. He brought his hands together in a cross seal. Shadow clone jutsu. With a dozen puffs of smoke, clones of Naruto appeared, flanking him. The knights faltered, their horses rearing in surprise. Now, the original Naruto yelled. In perfect unison, each Naruto created a swirling ball of blue energy in his hand. But this was different. He was drawing in the energy of the world around him, the natural energy Albedo could feel but not comprehend. The Rasengans grew, larger and more stable than any standard version, humming with an immense, controlled power. Sage art. Massive Rasengan barrage. The clones charged. They didn't even try to engage the knights. They ran straight for the angels. The archangel flames, beings of holy magic, met the spheres of pure natural energy. There was no grand explosion. There was only erasure. The moment a Rasengan touched an angel, the angelic form dissolved, its magical energy completely and utterly unmade by the overwhelming force of the sage art. In less than 10 seconds, all 12 summons were gone, vanished as if they had never existed. Nigan stared, his jaw hanging open in disbelief. His trump card, the symbol of his scripture's might, had been annihilated by a band of ruffians and their glowing blue orbs. Impossible. What sorcery is this? He shrieked, his composure shattering. He is a heretic, a monster. Use the crystal. We will call upon the highest orders of divinity. An acolyte brought him a large, deep blue crystal that pulsed with incredible power. It was a sealing crystal, holding a spell far beyond what any of them could cast. Oh, a high-tier item, Albedo noted from above, a hint of academic interest in her tone. This might be interesting. Nigan held the crystal aloft. Behold the power of God. I summon thee, Dominion Authority. The crystal shattered, unleashing a torrent of holy power that dwarfed the angels. A new being began to form, a majestic, multi-winged angel of immense size, radiating an aura of absolute law and holy judgment. That's enough of that, Naruto said, his voice bored. Before the angel could fully materialize, he vanished. One moment he was standing in the field, the next he was gone. Nigan blinked, trying to find him. A shadow fell over him. He looked up. Naruto was standing on the canopy of his palanquin, looking due at him with an expression of profound disappointment. You talk too much, Naruto said. With a single, precise chop to the back of the neck, Nigan Grid Luin crumpled, unconscious. The half-formed angel, its summoner incapacitated, wavered and dissolved into motes of light. The remaining knights, their leader defeated and their gods silent, stared in frozen terror. One of Naruto's clones appeared in their midst. Your boss is taking a nap, the clone said cheerfully. Now, drop your weapons and get lost before my original decides you're not worth the effort of keeping alive. The sound of zens of swords and spears clattering to the ground was the only answer. The knights turned and fled, a disorganized rabble, leaving their unconscious leader behind. The entire battle had lasted less than 2 minutes. Naruto hopped down from the palanquin, dusting off his hands. He looked over at the villagers, who were peering out from their homes and from behind the flimsy barricade, their faces a mixture of terror and dawning incredulous hope. Some of them were injured, hit by stray arrows or trampled in the initial panic. He walked towards them, his expression softening. An old woman clutched a deep gash on her arm. A young boy had a broken leg, the bone jutting out at an unnatural angle. Albedo landed silently behind him, her mind a whirlwind. The raw power was one thing. She had seen power before. Lord Ains possessed power that could end the world. But this was different. It was the efficiency, the control, the utter lack of malice. He hadn't fought with rage or righteous fury. He had fought like a man swatting a fly, a brief, necessary action, already forgotten. But what he did next was what truly broke her understanding of the world. He knelt beside the boy with the broken leg. The child cried out, half in pain, half in fear of this strange, powerful man. Naruto simply placed a hand over the wound. A soft, golden light, warmer and more gentle than the harsh energy of the Rasengan, emanated from his palm. Albedo watched, mesmerized. She saw the bone shift under the skin, knitting itself back together. She saw the torn flesh mend, the skin smoothing over until not even a scar remained. The boy's cries of pain turned into gasps of wonder. Naruto moved to the old woman, placing his hand over her arm. The gash closed, the blood vanishing as if it were a bad dream. He moved through the crowd of wounded. From person to person, his hands glowing with that impossible, life-giving light. He was reversing death. He was creating life from injury. He was a force of pure, benevolent creation. Power, in Albedo's experience, was for conquering, for dominating, for destroying enemies and protecting Nazarick. Lord Ains's magic could raise legions of undead, call down meteors, and inflict instant death. That was true power. But this was the power to give, to heal, to restore. It was an application of strength so fundamentally alien to her nature that it caused a deep, seismic tremor in the foundations of her being. She was programmed to love Momonga, the ultimate symbol of power and supremacy. She had just witnessed a being who had effortlessly displayed a completely different, yet equally absolute, form of supremacy. The supremacy of life over death, of mercy over destruction. The villagers were no longer afraid. They were on their knees, not in the grove. Ling terror the knights had tried to inspire, but in genuine, cheerful reverence. They weren't looking at a conqueror. They were looking at a god. A kind god. Naruto finished healing the last of the wounded and stood up. Looking slightly tired, he saw Albedo staring at him, her beautiful face a canvas of utter confusion. What? He asked, rubbing the back of his neck. Why? The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. Why would you expend your energy on these insects? Because they were hurt, Naruto said, as if it were the simplest, most obvious thing in the world. And I could help. That's all. There's no grand strategy. You see someone in need, you help them. That's how you build a village. That's how you build a world worth living in. He turned and walked towards the edge of the forest, leaving her standing there as the villagers began to tentatively approach him, their voices filled with worshipful thanks. Albedo watched him go, and for the first time in her existence, she felt the rigid certainty of her programmed love for Ainzul gown crack, just a little. A tiny fissure, through which a confusing, brilliant light was starting to shine. Naruto needed a moment. The adulation of the villagers was suffocating. He was used to being respected as Hokage, but this raw, desperate worship made his skin crawl. He slipped away to the edge of the forest, leaning against a tree and taking a deep breath of the night air. Something was wrong. It was a faint, lingering disturbance in the natural energy of the area. A cold spot, a place where the life of the forest felt thin and sterile. It was different from the all-encompassing undeath of Nazarick. This was a sharper, more focused wrongness, like a surgical cut in the fabric of the world. His senses, always on alert, followed the feeling. He pushed himself off the tree and walked deeper into the woods, away from the village. Lord Naruto. Albedo's voice came from behind him. He glanced back. She was following him, her expression no longer confused, but serious and watchful. She was back to her role as bodyguard. Felt something, he said simply, not breaking his stride. Something that doesn't belong. She fell into step beside him, her demonic senses straining. I feel nothing. It's not magic, he explained. It's like a scar on the world. They walked for another 100 yards before he found it. Lying in a small clearing, face down in the dirt, was a man in simple leather armor, a hunting bow slung over his back. A village scout. He was dead, but it was the cause of death that made Naruto freeze. There was no blood. In the center of the man's back was a perfectly round, fist-sized hole that went straight through his body. The edges of the wound, on his leather armor and his flesh, were not burned or torn. They were flawlessly smooth, and the flesh within had a strange, silvery, cauterized sheen. It was as if that section of his body had been neatly and cleanly erased from existence. What kind of spell does that? Albedo whispered, her eyes wide. She knelt, examining the wound with a professional eye. Her encyclopedic knowledge of Yggdrasil's thousands of spells and skills offered no match. This was not instant death magic, which left the body intact. It was not disintegration, which would have turned him to dust. This was something else, something clean, precise, and utterly terrifying. Naruto knelt beside her, his fingers tracing the air just above the wound. He could feel the residual energy. It was cold, yes, but not the stagnant cold of undeath. It was a sterile, impersonal cold, like the void between stars. And it was tinged with a faint, silvery resonance that made his sage mode senses recoil. It felt profoundly unnatural, an energy designed to unmake creation itself. His eyes scanned the body, looking for anything else. He saw it, tucked into the man's belt, almost completely obscured. It was a small, metal fragment, clearly not belonging to the scout. It looked like a piece of a shattered emblem. It was made of a strange, silvery metal, and etched into its surface were fine, interwoven lines, like threads in a complex tapestry. He picked it up. It was cold to the touch, and the faint, sterile energy clung to it. He showed it to Albedo. Ever seen anything like this? She took the fragment, her expression grim. Never. Not in Yggdrasil, not in any tome in the Ashurbanipal. The design is unfamiliar. The energy, it is anathema. Naruto stood up, his gaze sweeping the silent, dark forest. The victory at the village suddenly felt hollow. The sunlight scripture were just thugs, bullies with a bit of power. This was different. This was the work of a professional. A killer with access to a power that was utterly alien to this world. And even to the denizens of Nazarick. They had walked into this world thinking they were the apex predators, the gods among insects. But the perfectly clean hole in the scout's back and the cold silver fragment in his hand told a different story. There was something else out there in the dark. Something powerful, something methodical, and something that had just announced its presence. The Me had just gotten infinitely more dangerous. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Tomb. The transition from the living, breathing forest back into the sterile, frigid air of Nazarick was a jarring sensory shock. One moment, Naruto was surrounded by the scent of damp earth and the quiet gratitude of the rescued villagers. The next, he and Albedo stepped through a shimmering portal back into the oppressive grandeur of the throne room. The shift was absolute. The warmth of life was instantly leached away, replaced by the tomb's familiar, soul-deep chill. Ains was waiting for them, seated upon the throne of kings, a silent, imposing monarch. The other floor guardians were assembled once more, their expressions a mixture of impatience and intense curiosity. Demiurge stood with his hands clasped behind his back, a faint, analytical smile on his face. Cocytus's mandibles clicked softly, his forearms crossed over his massive chest. Aura and Mare stood together, Aura bouncing slightly on the balls of her feet with restless energy, while her brother seemed to shrink into himself. And Shalltear, her ruby-red eyes were locked onto Albedo, a dangerous, predatory light dancing within them. She had been left behind. And she was not pleased. Report, Ains commanded, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. The single word carried the weight of absolute authority. Albedo stepped forward and knelt, her posture one of perfect subservience. My lords, the mission was a success. The hostile forces, identified as the sunlight scripture of the slain theocracy, have been neutralized. The village is secure. Neutralized. Demiurge interjected, his voice smooth as silk. An interesting choice of word, Albedo. Were they eliminated? The leader was rendered unconscious, Albedo reported, her gaze fixed on the floor. The rest were disarmed and allowed to flee. There were no fatalities among the enemy forces. A low murmur went through the guardians. Cocytus let out a puff of frosty air that sounded like a grunt of approval. Demiurge's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, allowing an enemy who knew of their existence to escape. It was a tactical blunder. It was my decision, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the tension. He hadn't knelt. He stood casually, arms crossed, drawing the attention of every being in the room. They were broken and terrified. Killing them would have been a waste of energy. A waste of energy. Shalltear's voice was a seductive, mocking purr. She took a step forward, her frilly dress swaying. Oh, but where is the fun in that? To let such TTLE morsels scurry away, it feels so incomplete. She shot a pointed look at Albedo. I imagine it must have been terribly boring for you, Albedo. All that power, and you didn't even get to stretch your wings. Albedo's expression remained placid, but Naruto could feel a spike of irritation from her. My duty was to observe, Shalltear. A duty I fulfilled to the letter. She then looked to Ains, holding up the small, silvery fragment. However, we did discover something of far greater significance. This was found on the body of a village scout, slain before the scripture's attack. Ains gestured, and the fragment floated from Albedo's hand, soaring across the room and into his grasp. He examined it, the red lights in his sockets glowing brighter. The cause of death, a perfect, circular wound that pierced his entire body. Albedo explained. There was no magic residue I could identify. The wound itself, it was as if a piece of him was simply erased from existence. The energy signature on this fragment is the only clue we have. Demiurge stepped forward, his interest clearly piqued. Erased, not disintegrated or destroyed by negative energy. Fascinating. May I, Lord Ains? Ains tossed the fragment to his archdevil subordinate. Demiurge caught it with deft fingers, his expression turning serious as he studied the object. The craftsmanship is exquisite, alien, and this energy, it feels like order. A cold, sterile, absolute order, the opposite of chaos, but also the opposite of life. It's a conceptual energy I've never encountered. So, we have an unknown player on the board, Ains summarized, his voice grave. One with access to powers beyond our considerable knowledge. This complicates matters. He looked at Naruto. Your decision to spare the knights now seems imprudent. They could be a source of information about this new threat. They didn't know anything, Naruto stated flatly. Their fear was simple. They were afraid of me, of what I did to their summons. The scout was killed by something else. Something quiet and precise. Those knights were loud and arrogant. Not the same signature. His certainty was absolute, born from a lifetime of sensing intent and reading the battlefield. It wasn't a guess, it was an observation. Demiurge looked up from the fragment, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully at Naruto. This new supreme being was not just a powerhouse of raw energy. He possessed an unnervingly sharp intuition. Lord Naruto's assessment is sound, Demiurge conceded, much to the surprise of the others. The methodology is completely different. The scripture was a blunt instrument. This is the work of an assassin. A very, very powerful one. Ainz seemed to process this, then he turned his attention back to Naruto's performance. Albedo. Report on Lord Naruto's combat capabilities. Albedo hesitated for a fraction of a second. He is efficient. She began to describe the battle in crisp, professional terms. The instantaneous creation of the shadow clones. The use of sage art to amplify his techniques, the complete nullification of the archangel flames, the blinding speed he used to incapacitate the enemy commander. She did not use flowery language, yet her tone conveyed a sense of profound awe. And after the hostiles were routed, Lord Naruto proceeded to heal the wounded villagers, she concluded. Heal them? Aura asked, her mismatched eyes wide with curiosity. With potions, or a spell? Albedo shook her head. Neither. He used his own energy. A golden light. It mended broken bones and closed fatal wounds in seconds, leaving no scars. It was a creative, life-giving force. A hush fell over the room. The Guardians stared at Naruto with a new level of understanding. They knew power. They were power. But the power to destroy was common among them. The power to create, to restore life so effortlessly, that was the purview of the highest gods. And he had used it on a handful of worthless humans. How wasteful, Shalltear breathed. Though her voice lacked its earlier mockery, it was now filled with a strange, fascinated wonder. To use such a divine gift on such lowly creatures. It wasn't a waste, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over them. It was a message, not for them, for you. He pointed a finger at Ainz. Your plan was to use that village as a data point. To sacrifice them for information. I showed you another way. I showed you that strength isn't just about how many you can kill. It's about how many you can protect. We didn't reveal the full power of Nazarick. We didn't expose any of you. I handled a regional threat by myself. Secured the gratitude and loyalty of the local population, and we discovered a far more dangerous enemy in the process. We gained more by saving them than we ever would have by letting them die. His words hung in the air, a direct challenge to Ainz's entire philosophy. He hadn't just gone against an order, he had proven his own method superior in every conceivable way. Ainz was silent. His emotional suppressor was a blizzard of ice in his mind, smothering the swirling vortex of humiliation, anger, and grudging respect. He had been outmaneuvered, publicly. This living, breathing anomaly had not only defied him but had then lectured him on strategy and morality in front of his most loyal followers. And the worst part was, he was right. Your point is well made, Ainz finally said. The words tasting like ash. Your methods, while unorthodox, have yielded favorable results. He had to concede. To argue would be to look weak and foolish. He had to absorb this, reframe it, and maintain control. You have demonstrated that there is more than one path to victory. A valuable lesson. He stood, his regal presence flooding the room. This new threat takes precedence. Demiurge, begin a full analysis of this fragment. I want to know its composition, its origin, everything. The rest of you, return to your duties, but remain on high alert. This world is proving to be more complex than we anticipated. He looked at Naruto. Lord Naruto, we have given you quarters on the 9th floor, befitting your station. I trust you will find them adequate. With that, he turned and swept from the room. A king retreating to lick his wounds. The guardians bowed as he passed, then slowly dispersed, casting curious, speculative, and worshipful glances at the man who had just stood up to their god and won. Albedo, Shalltear, and Naruto were the last ones left in the vast, silent hall. You were magnificent, Lord Naruto, Albedo said, her voice a low, reverent whisper. She had risen from her knees, and her golden eyes were shining with an emotion he couldn't quite decipher. He was reckless, Shalltear countered, stepping up to Naruto's other side, placing herself in direct opposition to Albedo. She ran a single, long fingernail down his arm, a gesture that was both a caress and a claim. But, she added, her voice dropping to a sultry murmur, the results are undeniable. That power to unmake those holy fools, and then the golden light, I've never seen anything so deliciously potent. The air crackled with their rivalry. It was no longer just about their master, Ains. It was about him. He was the new, fascinating variable in their world, the brilliant sun that had appeared in their starless sky, and they were two planets vying for the closest orbit. Naruto sighed, pulling his arm away from Shalltear's touch. I'm tired. Show me to these quarters. It would be my honor, they both said in perfect, competitive unison, glaring at each other over his head. This, Naruto thought with a sense of deep foreboding, was going to be complicated. The quarters assigned to him were, in a word, absurd. They were less a set of rooms and more a miniature palace. Easily the size of the entire Hokage Tower. The main chamber had a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow, from which hung a chandelier made of what looked like captured starlight. The furniture as carved from polished obsidian and upholstered in fabrics that shimmered with their own inner light. A massive, four-poster bed, large enough to sleep a dozen people, sat on a raised platform, its curtains woven from pure spun gold. Naruto stood in the middle of it all, feeling utterly out of place. His own small apartment in Konoha, with its comfortable clutter and ramen-stained table, felt a universe away. This place was cold, opulent, and dead. It was a museum, not a home. He heard a soft knock on the colossal doors. Come in, he called out, his voice sounding small in the vast space. The door swung open, and Albedo entered, carrying a tray laden with food and drink. She had changed from her armor into her pure white dress, her black wings tucked neatly behind her. I thought you might be hungry after your exertions. Lord Naruto, she said, her voice soft. She placed the tray on a low table. I took the liberty of having the chefs prepare a selection of dishes. Though, we are uncertain of your preferences. Naruto looked at the tray. There were roasted meats he didn't recognize, strange, luminescent fruits, and a goblet of wine so dark it seemed to drink the light. He picked up a piece of bread and took a bite. It was tasteless. He missed Ichiraku's. Thank you, Albedo, he said, sitting on the edge of a ludicrously ornate sofa. That was thoughtful. She remained standing, a picture of serene grace. But he could feel the turmoil beneath her placid exterior. Her energy was a jumble of confusion, awe, and a deep-seated conflict he recognized all too well. It was the conflict of a soldier beginning to question their orders. You're still bothered by what happened in the village, he stated. Her composure wavered. I am merely processing the data, my lord. Your methods were effective. Stop with the, my lord, stuff when we're alone, all right. It's just Naruto, he said, waving a dismissive hand. And stop talking like one of Demiurge's reports. I'm asking you, what are you feeling? She fell silent, her hands twisting in front of her. No one had ever asked her that. Lord Ains gave commands. The other guardians engaged in schemes or rivalries. But no one had ever simply asked her what she was feeling. I feel confusion, she admitted, the word a confession. My entire existence is predicated on a single, absolute truth. The supreme beings are justice. Their will is law, to serve them is the greatest good. And, Naruto prompted gently, and today, she continued, her voice barely a whisper, I saw two supreme beings with two different wills. Lord Ains, my creator, my god of gods, proposed a path of cold, hard logic. A path I have always understood. And you proposed a path of mercy, of compassion. And your path was not only the more virtuous, it was the more effective. It achieved all of Lord Ains's goals, and more, at no cost. She finally looked at him, her golden eyes wide with a desperate, pleading confusion. How can this be? How can there be two, right, paths? How can your will, which contradicts the will of my creator, also be absolute justice? Naruto looked at her, at this perfect, powerful being struggling with the first real philosophical crisis of her life. He saw not a monster or a demon, but someone trapped in a cage of her own design. Because there's no such thing as absolute justice, he said softly. There are just people making choices. Ains is making the choices he thinks are best to protect all of you, based on his experiences. He's cautious. He's paranoid. He sees threats in every shadow. Because he's afraid of losing you. It's not that different from how I saw things, when I first became Hokage. The admission surprised her. He was comparing his own rule to Lord Ains's. When you're in charge, Naruto continued. His gaze distant, everyone is telling you to be practical. To make sacrifices for the greater good. It's easy to start seeing people as numbers on a spreadsheet. Pawns on a board. You did that today. You called those villagers insects. Albedo flinched as if he had struck her. But they're not, he said, his eyes meeting hers again, clear and direct. They're people. They love, they fear, they bleed. The moment you forget that, the moment you decide some lives are worth less than others, you've already lost. Not the battle, but the war. You just become another monster fighting for a bigger piece of dirt. He leaned forward. You're the overseer, Albedo. You have more power than kings. What kind of kingdom do you want to build? One ruled by fear, where people are disposable tools. Or one where people are protected, where life is valued. That's a choice you have to make, not Ains, not me. He was treating her not as a subordinate, not as a creation, but as an equal. A fellow leader, faced with the same burdens of command. He wasn't giving her an order. He was giving her a choice, a responsibility. He was giving her personhood. Tears, shimmering like diamonds, welled in her eyes. I have never. She couldn't finish the sentence. The foundation of her world was cracking, and through the fissure, she was seeing something new, the possibility of a will that was her own. Just think about it, Naruto said, his voice gentle once more. He stood up and walked to the enormous window, which looked out not onto sky, but onto a swirling, magical nebula that served as the 9th floor's ceiling. Albedo watched his back, her heart hammering in her chest. Her programming screamed one thing, love Momonga. But her mind, her soul, was now captivated by this man who saw not the overseer, but Albedo. The man who had shown her a power greater than destruction, and who had just handed her the key to her own identity. Thank you, Naruto, she whispered, the me feeling strange and wonderful on her tongue. Without another word, she turned and fled the room, her mind in a state of beautiful, terrifying chaos. Naruto was exploring the labyrinthine corridors of the 9th floor, trying to walk off the strange energy of his conversation with Albedo, when he felt the shift in the air. A faint scent of blood and jasmine. A subtle drop in temperature. He stopped in front of a vast, double-doored balcony that overlooked a cavernous, moonlit grotto. I was wondering when you'd show up, he said to the empty air. A musical giggle answered him from the shadows of the balcony. Oh, were you waiting for me? Shalltear Bloodfallen stepped into the moonlight, a vision in her gothic dress, her silver hair shimmering. I must say, I'm flattered. After all the ime you just spent with that witless gorilla. Albedo's not witless, Naruto said, leaning against the balustrade. She's just wound tight. She's a lovesick fool whose programming has been broken, Shalltear corrected. Sidling up next to him. She was close enough for him to feel the unnatural cold emanating from her skin. Her data was corrupted by Lord Ains on a whim. Her love is nothing but a glitch. Mine, however, she looked up at him, her red eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. My appreciation for powerful, unique beings is a core part of my design. And you, Lord Naruto, you are the most unique thing I have ever encountered. Her approach was the polar opposite of Albedo's. Where Albedo was confused and reverent, Shalltear was direct, provocative, and utterly confident. She saw him as a prize. The ultimate novelty to be acquired. So I'm just a shiny new toy for you to play with? He asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. The shiniest, she purred. That power you used. It was like watching the sun itself come down to burn away the filth. So pure, so absolute. And then that healing. To give life with a touch, it makes my dead heart flutter. She placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. I want to feel it. I want to know it. I want to taste it. Her intent was unmistakable. Seduction was a weapon for her, a tool of control. He could feel the enchantment magic woven into her words. Her scent, her very presence. It was designed to overwhelm the senses of any mortal man. But he was not any mortal man. His mind, honed by sage mode and disciplined by years of war, was an unshakable fortress. He simply looked down at her hand, then back to her eyes. You talk about love and desire, he said, his voice calm and even, completely unaffected by her spell. But what do you actually know about it? What is love to you, Shalltear? The question caught her off guard. She had expected him to react, to push her away, or to fall under her spell. This calm, philosophical inquiry was not on the script. Love is absolute devotion to the supreme beings, of course, she answered, the programmed response coming automatically. My love for my creator, Lord Peroroncino, is absolute. Is it? Naruto asked. Or is it just loyalty? You were made to serve him. Is that the same as loving him? I had a friend. She loved another friend of mine for years. She thought it was the grand romance of her life. But it wasn't love. It was admiration. It was a desire to be seen by the person everyone else thought was amazing. It took her a long time to figure out the difference. He was talking about Sakura, about Sasuke, about the tangled mess of their youth. The memory was distant, but the lesson was sharp as glass. Shalltear frowned, her seductive mask slipping. I do not understand the distinction. Love isn't just about wanting something, Naruto explained, his gaze turning to the moonlit grotto below. It's not about possession. Sometimes, it's about sacrifice. Sometimes it's about wanting what's best for someone else, even if it's not what's best for you. It's about seeing someone for who they are, all their flaws and all their strengths, and choosing to stand by them anyway. It's quiet. It's not a big, loud, dramatic thing. It grows. Like a tree. He was speaking from a place of deep, personal experience. He was thinking of Hinata. Of her quiet, unwavering belief in him when no one else had it. Of her courage. Of the family they had built. It was a lifetime of feeling condensed into a few simple words. Shalltear stared at him, her mind reeling. He had completely disarmed her. He hadn't rejected her. He had engaged her on a level she had never even considered. He saw through her seductive facade, through her programming, and was speaking to the core of her being. You speak as if you know this feeling, intimately, she whispered, her voice losing its predatory edge, now filled with genuine curiosity. Naruto gave a small, sad smile. I do, and I know the pain that comes with it, too. Love, real love, isn't a game, Shalltear. It's not a prize to be won. It's the most powerful and most dangerous thing in the universe. Yo, you shouldn't throw the word around unless you understand what it means. He pushed himself off the balustrade. You're not just a weapon or a pretty doll. You're more than your programming. But you've got to figure out who you are before you can figure out what you want. He left her there on the balcony, alone in the moonlight. She watched him go, the scent of jasmine and blood mingling with the crisp, cold air. He hadn't fallen for her trap. He hadn't dismissed her. He had seen her, challenged her, and left her with a puzzle she couldn't solve, a thirst he had awakened that had nothing to do with blood. She wanted to understand what he was talking about. And she wanted him to be the one to teach her. Days passed. The whispers in the tomb grew louder. The news of a second supreme being, nay, who had humbled the first and wielded the power of life itself, had spread through every level of Nazarick. A new, complex dynamic was forming. The denizens still revered Ainz Ulgaon as their creator and absolute ruler. But Naruto Uzumaki was now regarded with a different kind of awe. He was the anomaly, the living god, the sun in their tomb. Ainz, for his part, had retreated into a state of intense, paranoid planning. He and Demiurge spent hours locked away in the treasury, analyzing the silver fragment and poring over data, trying to anticipate the moves of their unseen enemy. Naruto, meanwhile, did what he always did, he observed. He used his clones to explore the vast, empty halls of Nazarick, learning its layout, and more importantly, learning its people. He spoke with Cocytus about the nature of a warrior's honor, with Aura about her beasts, and even sat in silence with Mare, offering a quiet, reassuring presence that calmed the nervous dark elf. He was slowly, methodically, building bridges. His relationships with Albedo and Shalltear evolved into a strange, tense dance. They vied for his attention in a constant, low-grade war of one-upmanship. Albedo would bring him meticulously researched reports on the world, trying to appeal to his strategic mind. Shalltear would challenge him to spars, hoping to engage his warrior spirit. Naruto navigated their rivalry with an exasperated but genuine patience, continuing his efforts to speak to them as individuals, pushing them to think beyond the confines of their settings. It was during a meeting in the round table room, where Ainz had gathered the Guardians to discuss their lack of progress on the silver fragment, that the world changed again. The energy signature is untraceable, Demiurge was saying, gesturing to a magical projection of the fragment. It leaves no trail, it simply is. It is a power of pure nullification. We have no countermeasure, because we do not understand the mechanism. As he spoke, a klaxon, a sound no one had heard since arriving in this world, blared through the room. A massive red rune flashed on the wall of Nazarik's primary alert system. Warning. High energy anomaly detected. Sector K-7. Coordinates to follow. Signature match. 98.9% confirmed. Argent energy profile. Ainz shot to his feet. Where? It's in the southern region of the Great Forest of Tog, approximately 300 kilometers from our position. Albedo reported instantly, her eyes glowing as she accessed the tomb's sensory data. The energy reading is immense. It dwarfs the residue we found on the Scout. It's a concentrated, stationary source. It's a trap, Naruto said quietly from his seat at the table. A lure. I agree, Demiurge said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. They are baiting us. They know we are here. And they are arrogant enough to believe we will walk into their parlor. Ainz looked at the flashing red rune. His mind was a storm of calculation. This was a threat, but it was also an unparalleled opportunity. To capture and interrogate the wielder of this power, to learn its secrets, the benefit was incalculable. But the risk was just as high. We must respond, Ainz declared. We cannot allow such a power to exist unchecked on our borders. The question is, who to send? He looked around the table. Shalltear stood up, a radiant, bloodthirsty smile on her face. My Lord Ainz, my Lord Naruto, allow me. All eyes turned to her. My build is the perfect counter for this, she argued, her logic sharp and precise. This, argent energy, as Demiurge calls it, feels conceptual. Why similar to holy magic, a power of pure order. My entire being is optimized for fighting divine casters. My spewed lance restores my health with every blow dealt to a holy opponent. I am immune to their status effects. I am a living anti-deity weapon. Send me. I will not fail. Ainz considered it. Her logic was flawless. Based on the data they had, Shalltear was indeed the ideal choice. She was the single strongest combatant in a one-on-one fight, and her specific skillset made her the perfect tool for this particular job. It was a logical, data-driven decision. It is still a potential trap, Shalltear, Albedo warned. A genuine note of concern in her voice that surprised even herself. You would be going alone. Then I shall be a trap for the trappers, Shalltear retorted, her confidence absolute. She looked from Ainz to Naruto, her eyes lingering on the latter. Let me prove my worth. Let me bring you back the head of this arrogant fool. Naruto felt a knot of unease in his gut. His senses were screaming that this was a bad idea. This argent energy felt different from the holy magic he knew. It was colder, emptier. He had a bad feeling that their assumptions were wrong. Shalltear, he started to say. But Ainz cut him off. The logic is sound, Ainz declared, making his decision. Shalltear bloodfallen. You are hereby ordered to proceed to the source of the energy. Your mission is to identify, engage, and if possible, capture the wielder. If the threat is too great, you are authorized to retreat immediately. Do not be reckless. Shalltear beamed, her entire being radiating triumphant joy. She had been chosen. She would show them all, Albedo, the other guardians, and especially Naruto, her true power. I will not disappoint you, my lords. She bowed deeply, then turned and marched from the room. Her every step filled with purpose and pride. A tense silence filled the room after her departure. Naruto stared at the empty doorway, the feeling of dread in his stomach growing colder. You just sent your strongest piece out alone to probe a threat you don't understand, he said quietly to Ainz. I sent the perfect countermeasure, Ainz corrected, though a sliver of doubt now entered his mind. Trust in my creations, Naruto. Trust in their strength. They waited. The minutes stretched into an hour. The red rune on the wall remained, a constant, baleful eye. Demure. GE monitored a dozen different magical sensors. Albedo stood as still as a statue, her face a mask of anxiety. Then, a frantic voice crackled through the message spell Ains had kept open to Shalltear. It was her voice, but distorted, shot through with static and a sound he had never heard from her, pure, unadulterated terror. My lord, it's not a weapon, it's... Her voice cut out, replaced by a raw, agonized scream. A scream not of physical pain, but of a mind being torn apart. Stealing my mind, can't think, it's... The connection severed, the red rune on the wall vanished, and in its place, a new symbol appeared. It was Shalltear's personal icon on the Nazarick status board, and it had turned from a friendly green to a hostile, blood red. She was no longer an ally. Silence. Absolute, horrified silence descended upon the round table room. Ains stared at the red icon, his skeletal frame rigid. Albedo gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Nazarick's strongest guardian had just been turned against them. The trap had been sprung. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Scarlet Saint and the Sage. The silence in the round table room was a physical weight, heavier and more suffocating than any spell. The red icon pulsed on the status board, a malevolent, crimson heartbeat that mocked them all. Shalltear Bloodfallen, Vampire, Guardian, the pinnacle of Nazarick's one-on-one combat power, had been turned. She was now an enemy. Ains's skeletal frame trembled, a violent, rattling tremor that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. A low, guttural growl escaped his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury that transcended his emotional suppression. How? The word was not a question, but a roar of disbelief. Her build is a perfect counter. She has high-level immunities. Mind-affecting abilities should be useless against her. Unless the attack wasn't a standard ability, Demiurge murmured, his face pale, his usual smug confidence shattered. He was staring at the red icon as if it were a basilisk. Lord Ains, what if they used a world item? The words fell into the room like stones into a deep well. A world item, the ultimate tools of power from Yggdrasil, items that could bend the very rules of the game. 20 were known as the 20 items of such cataclysmic power they could devastate entire servers. But there were hundreds of others, each with a unique, reality-defying ability. An item that could bypass all resistances and seize control of even a level 100 NPC. It was not only possible, it was the only explanation that made sense. Ains slammed his fist on the table, the enchanted wood cracking under the blow. The red light in his eyes flared, a miniature supernova of rage and self-loathing. This is my fault. My fault. I was arrogant. I relied on the old data. I sent her into a trap I should have foreseen. He stood, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. I will retrieve her myself. I will tear this, Argent Crusade, from the world root and stem. He was a king consumed by guilt, ready to throw himself into the fire to atone for his mistake. His hand was already reaching for a ring on his finger, one that would teleport him directly to her location. No, the word was quiet, but it cut through Ains's rage-fueled haze like a razor. Naruto stood up from the table, his expression calm, his eyes clear and sharp. He walked round the table and placed a hand on Ains's shoulder. The touch was firm, grounding. You're not going, Naruto stated. It wasn't a suggestion. Ains turned his head, the crimson fire in his sockets fixing on Naruto. Get out of my way. She is my responsibility. One of my friend's precious creations is in the hands of the enemy because of my failure. And what happens if they have another one? Naruto countered, his voice steady. What happens if they have a world item that can trap you? You are the leader of Nazarick. You're the linchpin that holds all of this together. If you fall, this place falls. You're the brain, I'm the muscle. Remember, this is a job for muscle. His logic was cold, simple, and undeniable. It pierced through Ains's guilt and rage, forcing him to see the strategic reality. Risking himself, the last supreme being and guild master, was an act of emotional folly, not leadership. He is right, Lord Ains, Albedo said, her voice trembling but firm. She had recovered from her initial shock, her face now a mask of grim determination. Your life is the single most valuable asset in all of Nazarick. We cannot risk it. Allow me to go. I will bring her back or die trying. No, Naruto said again. his gaze shifting to Albedo. You're the overseer. You're Ain's second in command. If something happens to both of us, you're the one who has to lead. You're needed here. He looked around the room, at the stunned and horrified faces of the remaining guardians. She's one of us. I'll bring her back. His voice was laced with a promise, a vow as solid and unbreakable as the ground beneath them. It was the voice of a man who had made the same promise 100 times before and had moved heaven and earth to keep it. Ain stared at him, the living anomaly, the walking contradiction who had challenged his every decision, yet now stood as his most rational and resolute defender. In that moment, Ain saw not an outsider, but a true comrade, a partner who saw the whole board. Not just his own emotional turmoil. You don't even know what you're facing, Ains argued, his voice losing its furious edge, now tinged with desperation. I know she's in trouble, Naruto replied simply. And I know she's our responsibility. That's enough for me. He gave Ain's shoulder a firm squeeze. Trust me, like you told me to trust in your creations. The words hit Ain's with the force of a physical blow. He was using Ain's own declaration against him, but not as a weapon. It was a plea for faith. Ain's skeletal form seemed to deflate slightly. The overwhelming rage subsided, replaced by the cold, heavy weight of command. Naruto was right. This was the correct strategic decision. It was also tearing him apart inside. Albedo, Naruto said, turning to the overseer. You're coming with me, my lord, she asked, startled. I need a guide, and I need someone to watch my back. I can handle the main threat, but I don't know who else is out there. You'll be my eyes, my backup. Can you do that? It was a brilliant move, and Ain saw it instantly. He was giving Albedo a role, a purpose, preventing her from feeling useless while simultaneously taking one of Nazarik's strongest with him. And by putting her in a support role, he was reinforcing his own position as the primary combatant, the one taking the ultimate risk. I will not fail you, Lord Naruto, Albedo vowed, her back straightening. Her eyes filled with a fierce new light. Good, Naruto said. He looked back at Ain's. Get everything ready on this end. Healing, support, whatever you need. When I bring her back, she's going to be a mess. He wasn't posturing. He was stating the inevitable outcome of the fight to come. Without waiting for a reply, he started for the door. Albedo, let's go. Point the way. Albedo cast one last look at Ain's. A look that was a mixture of apology and grim promise, before turning to follow Naruto. As they left the room, Ain sank back into his chair, the feeling of helpful. A venomous serpent coiling in his soul. He had given the order that had doomed Shalltear. And now, he had to place his faith in an outsider to clean up his mess. The Sorcerer King had never felt less like a king. The great forest of Tob was a sea of black and silver under the light of the three moons. Naruto and Albedo flew through the night, the wind a cold knife against his skin. He wasn't flying under his own power. Albedo was carrying him, her powerful arms wrapped around his waist, her massive black wings beating a steady, powerful rhythm that propelled them forward at incredible speed. The physical contact was a strange sort of intimacy, purely practical yet undeniably close. Her last known position was in a valley in the heart of the Ogre-run territories, Albedo said, her voice loud and clear over the rushing wind. The energy signature vanished, but the locator on her equipment should still be active. This Argent Crusade. They chose their spot well, Naruto mused, his senses stretched to their limit. Scanning the world below, isolated, populated by hostile creatures to deter travelers. They knew we'd be the only ones to respond to a magical lure of that magnitude. Their intelligence is frighteningly accurate, Albedo agreed, her tone grim. They knew of our sensory capabilities, and they possessed a weapon capable of subduing a floor guardian. They are not a foe to be underestimated. Naruto was quiet for a moment, feeling the cold air, the vast emptiness of the world around them. Albedo, what is Shalltear like? The question surprised her. She is a floor guardian. She is the creation of Lord Peroroncino. She is a true vampire, one of the most powerful beings in Nazarik. That's her resume, Naruto said, shaking his head. I mean, who is she? You two are rivals. You fight all the time. But you know her better than anyone. What drives her? Albedo was silent for a long moment, the only sound the powerful thrum of her wings. Her rivalry wit, Shalltear was a core component of her personality, a constant source of friction and conflict. But to analyze it, to speak of her rival as a person. She is proud, Albedo began, the words coming slowly. Her pride is immense. She is proud of her power, proud of her appearance, proud of her creator. She is a perfectionist in all things, especially combat. She sees it as an art form. She paused. And she is unrestrained. She indulges her base desires without shame. Her bloodlust, her necrophilia, her sadism, she embraces them as part of her identity. I have always found it distasteful. But, Naruto prompted, sensing there was more. But there is no one more dedicated to the glory of Nazarick, Albedo admitted, her voice softening with a grudging respect. She would throw herself into the sun if Lord Ains commanded it. Her loyalty, in its own twisted way, is as absolute as my own. She is a true daughter of Nazarick. Naruto nodded, piecing it together. A proud, hedonistic perfectionist with an unshakable core of loyalty. This wasn't just a brainwashed puppet he had to fight. He had to save a person. A person his new family cared about, even if they showed it in strange ways. The stakes, already high, became intensely personal. We're close, Albedo announced, her body tensing. The locator signal is just over this ridge. And, Lord Naruto, the very air feels wrong. She was right. As they crested the final ridge, the wrongness hit him like a physical blow. The valley below was shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog, an eerie silver mist that seemed to glow with its own faint light. The vibrant life energy of the forest stopped abruptly at the fog's edge, as if hitting a wall. Inside that mist, there was nothing. No life, no death, just a sterile, silent void. And at its heart, a single, familiar signature. Now twisted and corrupted into something cold and alien. Shalltear. Albedo landed them silently at the edge of the fog bank. The mist swirled around their ankles, cold and dead. This is it, Albedo whispered, her hand resting on the hilt of her bardichi. The argent energy Demiurge described. It's polluting the entire valley. Stay behind me, Naruto ordered, stepping into the fog. It's designed to attack the mind. Your loyalty is strong, Albedo, but this thing captured Shalltear. Don't take any chances. He closed his eyes, drawing on his own chakra. A thin, golden film of energy coated his body, a protective layer of his own life force. He could feel the silvery mist trying to invade his mind, a subtle, whispering pressure promising order, peace. The cessation of all painful emotion. It was a siren song of blissful emptiness. His chakra burned it away, a shield of pure vitality against the encroaching nullity. They moved deeper into the valley. The silence was absolute. No insects buzzed, no leaves rustled. The trees were still and gray, their leaves crumbling to dust at the slightest touch. This wasn't death, it was erasure. And then they saw them. Standing in a loose formation around a clearing were a half-dozen figures clad in shimmering, silver-white plate armor that seemed woven from solid light. They wore no emblems, their faces hidden behind impassive, featureless helms. They stood perfectly still, like statues, radiating that same cold, sterile energy as the mist. The Argent Heralds. In the center of the clearing, standing before a grotesque, pulsating altar of silver, crystalline material, was Shalltear. She was still beautiful, still clad in her elegant dress. But her face was a blank, empty mask. Her ruby eyes, normally so full of life and malice, were dull and vacant. She stood with the placid stillness of a doll on a shelf. But the power radiating from her was undiminished. If anything, it felt more focused, more dangerous. Stripped of all personality and refined to pure killing intent. Shalltear, Albedo breathed, her voice filled with horror. Halt, abominations. The voice was not from one of the heralds. It came from a figure standing beside the altar, a man who had been invisible to their senses until he chose to speak. He was tall and broad-shouldered, clad in the same silvery armor, but his was far more ornate. Etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow. He held no weapon, his hands clasped behind his back. He removed his helmet, revealing a face that might have once been handsome but was now marred by a fanatic's zeal. His eyes glowed with a soft, silver light. This was Valerius' son sworn. You have come, as the Weaver predicted, Valerius said, his voice calm and resonant. The voice of a man utterly convinced of his own righteousness. You have walked into the purifying flame, drawn by the thrall of your own filth. Let her go, Naruto said, his voice low and dangerous. Valerius laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Let her go. This thing is a festering wound upon reality. A mockery of life and death. We have not captured her. We have sanctified her. They cleansed her of the chaotic taint of her false life and turned her into a saint of order. She is an instrument of the divine will now. He gestured to Shalltear. Behold, our scarlet saint. Is she not beautiful? She will be the instrument of your own purification. Albedo, Naruto said, his eyes never leaving Shalltear. The Silver Knights are yours. Keep them busy. Don't kill them unless you have to. I want answers from them. And you, Lord Naruto? Albedo asked, her grip tightening on her weapon. I'm going to have a little talk with our friend. Before Valerius could react, Naruto charged. He moved with explosive speed. A golden blur streaking across the clearing. The Argent Heralds moved to intercept, their movements impossibly fast and perfectly synchronized, but Albedo was faster. With a roar of fury, she dropped from the sky like a black comet, her massive bardichi swinging in a devastating arc. Get away from him, she screamed, her attack forcing the heralds to divert their attention to her. The path to Shalltear was clear. As Naruto closed the distance, Shalltear's vacant eyes flickered and focused on him. Her expression remained blank, but her body moved with lethal grace. Purifying javelin, she chanted, her voice a flat monotone. A lance of pure white, holy energy materialized in her hand, and she thrust it at him. Naruto didn't dodge, he met it head-on. A Rasengan, humming with natural energy, formed in his palm and he smashed it into the tip of her holy lance. The collision was silent but devastating. The two opposing energies, the world's life force versus a manufactured divine power, annihilated each other in a flash of light. Naruto used the momentary blindness to get inside her guard. He aimed a precise chop at her neck, the same move he'd used on Nigan. But Shalltear was not Nigan. Her head tilted at an impossible angle, dodging the blow, while her other hand, nails elongated into vicious claws, swiped at his throat. He leaned back, the claw, passing a hair's breadth from his neck. This was not the proud, flamboyant fighter Albedo had described. This was a machine, a perfect, ruthless killing machine executing flawless counters. Her programming was still there, but her personality, her flair, her very soul, was gone. Wake up, Shalltear, he yelled, disengaging and creating distance. This isn't you. Her only response was to raise her hand. Summon household. The ground trembled as dozens of vampire bats, vampire wolves, and lesser vampire spawn erupted from the earth, their eyes glowing with the same vacant red as their masters. They swarmed him, a tide of claws and fangs. Don't have time for this. Naruto growled, making a hand sign. Sage art. Gojo soap bubble slither. He exhaled a massive torrent of slick, viscous soap bubbles that filled the air. The summoned creatures, charging at full speed, were caught in the flood. Their feet slipped, their flight patterns faltered. They crashed into each other, a chaotic, flailing mess, unable to gain any purchase or coordinate an attack. While they were distracted, Naruto focused on Shalltear again. He could feel it now, the thing that held her. It was a foreign object, a parasitic entity lodged deep within her mind, wrapped around her consciousness like a thorny vine. It was the world item. He couldn't destroy it from the outside without destroying her mind with it. He had to get through to her. He had to make her fight back from the inside. If you can't hear me, Naruto said, his hands blurring through seals, then maybe you'll feel this. He slammed his palms on the ground. Sage art. Summoning jutsu. An enormous puff of smoke erupted, far larger than any of his previous summons. From within the smoke, a colossal form emerged, a figure so immense it dwarfed the trees of the valley. Gamabunta, the chief toad of Mount Myoboku, materialized in the misty valley, a massive tonto strapped to his side, his pipe jutting from his mouth. Naruto, what in the blazes is this place? Smells like a damn hospital. The toad boss boomed, his voice shaking the ground. Valerius and the heralds, locked in combat with Albedo, faltered for a second, their impasse. Facades cracking as they stared at the mountain-sized toad that had just appeared from nowhere. Just a little pest control, Gamabunta. Naruto yelled, landing on the toad's head. Give me some cover. HMPH. Kids today, always picking fights in the weirdest places. Gamabunta drew his massive blade. Alright, ya little gnat. Let's see how you handle this. He swung the Tonto, a blade the size of a tower, at Shalltear. The brainwashed vampire showed no fear. She simply flew upward, effortlessly dodging the colossal strike, and pointed a finger at the toad. Implosion. A sphere of distort, space appeared next to Gamabunta's head. With a sickening crunch, the air and light folded in on themselves. The high-tier spell, capable of crushing a victim into a tiny ball, impacted the chief toad. But Gamabunta was infused with Naruto's own six-path sage chakra, a protective cloak of immense power. The spell still hurt, gouging a deep, bloody wound in his side, but it failed to kill him. Gah, the little bitch has a nasty sting. Gamabunta roared, more angered than injured. This was the opening Naruto needed. While Shalltear was focused on the massive target, Naruto launched himself from Gamabunta's head. Cloaked in a golden aura of chakra, he appeared behind her in midair. She spun to react, her combat instincts still flawless, but he was too fast. This time, he wasn't aiming for a knockout blow. He grabbed her, wrapping his arms around her in a crushing bear hug, trapping her arms at her sides. Her cold, unliving flesh was like stone against his. She struggled, her strength immense, but he held fast. His own physical power, amplified by Sage Mode, meeting hers. I'm not letting go, Shalltear, he grunted, his face next to hers, his voice a low whisper in her ear. You're going to listen to me. He could feel the world item fighting him, pulsing with that cold, sterile energy, trying to force him to release its puppet. It was like wrestling with a ghost. This thing that has you, it wants to erase you. He whispered, pouring his own thoughts, his own energy, directly into her. It wants to turn you into an empty doll. Is that what you want? To be a thing, a tool for someone else's holy war? She thrashed in his arms, a silent, violent struggle. Your Shalltear bloodfallen, he yelled into her ear, his voice filled with a desperate, commanding energy. The most powerful guardian of Nazarick. A proud, beautiful, terrifying force of nature. You are not a saint. You're a monster. And you are glorious. Remember who you are. Remember your pride. Are you going to let this cheap trinket steal it from you? Are you going to let it make you a slave? He was using her own nature, the personality traits Albedo had described, as a weapon. Her pride, her identity. Fight it, Shalltear. Fight it. He wasn't just shouting words. He was doing something far more dangerous, far more intimate. He focused his six-path sage chakra, the ultimate expression of life and spiritual energy, and began to force it into her body. Not as an attack, but as an infusion. It was like jump-starting a dead engine with a bolt of lightning. Her body convulsed violently in his arms. The silver mist of the valley was drawn to them, swirling around them in a vortex. The world item was fighting back, its cold, orderly energy clashing with Naruto's vibrant, chaotic life force inside her very soul. It was a battle being fought on a spiritual plane. For a brief, blinding moment, their minds connected. He saw fragments of her existence. The face of her creator, Peroroncino, a memory filled with joy and adoration. He saw her rivalry with Albedo, a flash of genuine, sisterly affection buried under layers of petty jealousy. He saw her loneliness, the endless, unchanging years in the tomb. And he saw the moment the world item struck, a feeling of absolute despair as her mind, her personality, her very self, was peeled away layer by layer, leaving only a hollow shell. And she saw him. She saw flashes of his life, a lonely boy on a swing set. A determined genin vowing to bring his friend home. A young man facing down a god of pain. A leader standing before an army, a hero to his people. A man holding his newborn son. She felt his pain, his triumphs, his unbreakable will. She felt his profound, unwavering belief in the power of bonds. The contact lasted only a second, but in that second, a universe of understanding passed between them. A raw, piercing scream tore from Shalltear's throat. It was not the mindless scream from that messaged spell. It was her own voice, filled with rage and defiance. It was the sound of a soul fighting its way back into the light. A brilliant flash of golden energy erupted from her body, a wave of power that blasted Naruto away from her and vaporized the silvery mist in a 100-meter radius. The Argent Heralds, battered from their fight with Albedo, cried out as the pure life energy washed over them, their silver armor cracking and smoking. Valerius threw up a hand to shield his eyes, a snarl of disbelief on his face. Shalltear hung in the air, her body trembling, her head bowed. She slowly lifted her head. The vacant, dull look was gone. Her ruby-red eyes were blazing with their old fire, and they were fixed on Naruto. And in those eyes, there was a whirlwind of emotion he had never seen before: shock, fury, gratitude. And something else, something deep and profound that looked terrifyingly like love. She had been to the edge of non-existence and back, and he was the one who had pulled her out of the abyss. Naruto landed on the ground, breathing heavily. The chakra infusion had taken a massive toll on him. He felt drained, exhausted. He looked up at her and managed a weary grin. "Welcome back." Albedo, her armor dented and scratched, stared in stunned silence, her bardichi held loosely in her hand. She had just witnessed not an exorcism, but a resurrection of the soul. Valerius's face was a mask of cold fury. His ultimate weapon had been turned back into the monster it was. His plan was in ruins. "You, abomination," he hissed. "What have you done?" Naruto ignored him. His focus was on Shalltear. She was free, but she was swaying in the air, clearly disoriented. The fight wasn't over. "No one gets left behind," Naruto said, his voice soft but carrying across the clearing. He looked from the exhausted Shalltear to the furious Valerius, then to the panting Albedo. "Not ever." He pushed himself to his feet, a fresh wave of golden chakra flaring around him, his exhaustion momentarily burned away by sheer force of will. He had brought her back. Now, he was going to finish this. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A Vow of Sun and Stars. The golden aura pulsed around Naruto, a defiant star against the sterile silver of the corrupted valley. The air crackled, thick with the aftermath of a spiritual war. Shalltear hung in the air, her body trembling, her mind a fragile, newborn thing just wrested from the void. Albedo stood panting, her magnificent armor marred by a dozen scorches and cuts from her battle with the Argent Heralds. Valerius Sunsworn's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, his divine plan shattered by the sheer, indomitable will of one man. "You have done nothing, monster," Valerius spat, his voice shaking with rage. "You have only delayed the inevitable cleansing. The weave, ours grand design cannot be halted by one chaotic spark." He raised a hand, and the battered Argent Heralds rallied to his side, their silver armor cracked but their resolve unbroken. "You have freed a demon, and now you both shall be purified in holy fire." Naruto ignored him. His focus was entirely on Shalltear. He could see her swaying, her consciousness flickering like a candle in a hurricane. She was free from the world item's control, but the psychic trauma was immense. She was vulnerable. "Albedo," Naruto called out, his voice sharp and commanding. "Get her out of here. Take her back to Nazarick. Now." "But Lord Naruto, the enemy," Albedo protested, her protective instincts warring with the order. "They're not the priority right now." "She is," he shot back, his gaze unwavering. "That's an order, Albedo." The tone, the absolute, unquestionable authority of a true leader in the heat of battle, cut through her hesitation. It was the voice of a Hokage, and it demanded obedience. "Yes, my lord." With a powerful beat of her wings, Albedo shot towards Shalltear. The vampire seemed barely aware as Albedo swept her up into a secure embrace. For a split second, the two rivals, one wounded and fragile, the other strong and protective, were united in a silent tableau of shared crisis. "Do not think you can escape," Valerius roared, lunging forward, a blade of pure silver light forming in his hand. He never made it. A massive shadow fell over him, and Gamabunta's colossal Tonto slammed down, not to kill, but to block, the impact shaking the very bedrock of the valley. "Your fight's with us, pal," the toad boss boomed. Naruto flashed in front of Valerius as he recoiled from the blade, his eyes cold. "Your business is with me." He glanced over his shoulder at Albedo, who was Ulrea. "Die ascending into the sky with Shalltear. Go, I'll handle this." Albedo met his eyes for a fraction of a second, a universe of gratitude and trust passing between them. Then she was gone, a black-winged angel carrying a fallen demon home. Naruto turned his full attention back to Valerius. The air grew heavy. Now, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Where were we? Valerius stared, his fanatic's zeal momentarily replaced by a warrior's appraisal. The being before him was exhausted. He could see it in the slight tremor of his hands, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. He had expended a colossal amount of energy to free the vampire. Yet, he stood his ground, a lone guardian against their entire force. You are a fool, Valerius stated, raising his silver blade. You have sent away your only support. You are alone and weakened. Now, you will be unmade. Naruto just smiled, a tired, weary thing that didn't reach his eyes. You think I'm alone? He made a single hand sign. All around the clearing, from the trees, from the ground, from the very air, dozens of figures shimmered into existence. Shadow clones. They hadn't been fighting. They had been waiting, hidden, observing. An entire platoon held in reserve. Valerius and his heralds froze, their confidence evaporating. They had been surrounded the entire time. The first rule of fighting a ninja, Naruto said, his voice echoing from all of his clones at once, is that you're never fighting just one ninja. He pointed at the heralds. Get them. The clones surged forward, a tide of orange and black. The battle was rejoined, but the dynamics had shifted entirely. The heralds were now on the defensive, overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Naruto walked slowly towards Valerius, who now stood alone, his silver blade humming with power. Just you and me now. I want answers. Who are you? What is this, Weaver, you keep talking about? You will get no answers from me, demon, Valerius hissed, his zeal returning. Only oblivion. He charged, his silver blade a blur of light. But Naruto, even exhausted, was on another level. He moved with an economy of motion that was breathtaking, weaving around the strikes, parrying the blade not with a weapon, but with chakra-reinforced hands that glowed with golden energy. Every time Valerius's holy blade met Naruto's chakra, there was a sharp sizzle, like water on a hot stone. Your power is chaos. It is the antithesis of the perfect, silent order the Weaver promises. Valerius grunted, his attacks becoming more frantic. Life isn't orderly, Naruto shot back, deflecting a thrust aimed at his heart. It's messy, it's loud, it's painful, and it's beautiful. Your Weaver sounds like a coward, afraid of living. He saw an opening. He ducked under a wide swing and slammed his palm into Valerius's chest. It wasn't a Rasengan. It was a gentle but unstoppable force that sent the zealot flying backward, his armor cracking, the breath driven from his lungs. Valerius crashed to the ground, his silver blade dissolving into motes of light. Naruto was on him in an instant, a kunai at his throat. The clones had already subdued the heralds, pinning them to the ground with unbreakable chakra holds. The battle was over. It's over, Naruto said, his voice low. Talk. Valerius just laughed, a broken, gurgling sound. You have won nothing. You cannot kill me, and you cannot hold me. A brilliant, silver light began to emanate from his body. It was a teleportation spell, but one powered by that same sterile, argent energy. It was unblockable. The Weaver sees you, Valerius choked out, his eyes glowing with incandescent silver light. The Weaver knows you, and it will unmake you and your entire nest of abominations. This is only the beginning. With a final, silent flash of silver light, he and all his heralds vanished, leaving Naruto alone in the silent, desecrated valley with only Gamabunta for company. Well, that was a pain in the ass, the Toad boss grumbled, sheathing his tanto. You all right, kid? You look like you went 12 rounds with the Nine Tails again. Something like that, Naruto breathed, finally letting his exhaustion wash over him. He fell to one knee, his body screaming in protest. He had won. He had saved Shalltear, but the cost had been immense. And the enemy was still out there, more dangerous than ever. Let's go home, boss, Naruto said, forcing himself to his feet. With a final puff of smoke, Gamabunta vanished, and Naruto stood alone, a solitary victor in an empty battlefield. He took a deep breath, and with the last of his strength, teleported back to the only home he had in this strange, new world. The infirmary on the 9th floor of Nazarick was a place of tense, controlled chaos. Ains, Albedo, Demiurge, and a Ho. Saint of Nazareth's highest-level healers and priests were gathered around a large, ornate bed where Shalltear lay. She was conscious, but her eyes were unfocused, and she trembled under a thick, velvet blanket. Her physical wounds were gone, healed by Nazareth's powerful magic, but the wounds to her mind were far deeper. Ains had already paid the staggering sum of gold required by the guild system to resurrect her. A function he was horrified and relieved still worked. The process had purged any lingering physical effects of the world item, but the memory, the psychic violation, remained. Naruto appeared at the door, leaning heavily against the frame. He looked drained, his clothes were singed, and he swayed on his feet. "Lord Naruto!" Albedo cried, rushing to his side, her arm instantly supporting him. The look she gave him was one of profound, unadulterated relief and adoration. Ains turned, his red eyes taking in Naruto's state. "You are injured." "I'm fine," Naruto grunted, waving a dismissive hand. "Just tired." "How is she?" "The resurrection ritual has restored her to her base state," Demiurge reported, stepping forward. "However, she is unresponsive. The mental trauma was, as you predicted, significant. It is as if her consciousness has retreated deep within itself." Naruto limped over to the bed, shrugging off Albedo's support. He looked down at Shalltear. She looked small, fragile, a far cry from the proud, predatory vampire he had met on the balcony. Her ruby eyes flickered towards him, a glimmer of recognition in their depths, before clouding over again with fear. He reached out and gently took her hand. It was as cold as ice. She flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. "Hey," he said softly, his voice for her alone. "It's okay. You're safe now. You're home." At the sound of his voice, a single tear traced a path down her pale cheek. It was a tear of real, genuine emotion. The first she had shown since her return. She squeezed his hand, a weak, trembling gesture that was more eloquent than any words. In that moment, everything changed. Albedo watched, her heart clenching with a complex emotion she couldn't name. It was jealousy, yes, but it was also a profound sense of awe and gratitude. He had risked everything for her rival, her enemy, because she was one of them. Shalltear, her mind a shattered mess, found the only anchor in her storm in the man who had pulled her from the abyss. Her devotion, previously a programmed loyalty to her creator and a predatory fascination with Naruto, was being reforged in the fires of trauma and salvation into something new. Something real, something absolute. Ains watched the scene, a storm of emotions his suppressor struggled to contain. Guilt, relief, and a startling, undeniable sense of pride in the man he had once seen as a threat. Naruto had done what he could not. He had saved one of his children, not with overwhelming power or a rare item, but with sheer, stubborn will and a fundamental understanding of the person inside the monster. Days turned into a week. Shalltear's recovery was slow. She rarely spoke, haunted by the memory of her own mind being peeled away. She suffered from violent nightmares, her screams echoing through the 9th floor. The only thing that could calm her was Naruto's presence. He would sit with her for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence, his warm, living energy a soothing balm against the cold memory of the Argent Void. He became her anchor, her protector, the one sure thing in her fractured reality. This created a new, unbearable tension in Nazareth. Albedo, driven by her own burgeoning, confusing feelings for Naruto, found herself in a constant state of turmoil. She saw the bond forming between Naruto and Shalltear, a bond forged in shared trauma and heroic salvation, and it terrified her. It was a connection she could not compete with. Her loyalty to Ains was still absolute, a bedrock principle of her existence. But her heart was being pulled in a new, impossible direction. The man who had shown her mercy, who had challenged her to be more than a program, was now devoting himself to her greatest rival. The breaking point came late one night. Albedo found Naruto on a balcony overlooking the swirling nebula of the 9th floor, a rare moment when he was alone. "She is sleeping peacefully," Albedo said, her voice tight. "Good," Naruto replied, not turning around. "She needs it. You have been very kind to her," Albedo said, the words costing her. "She's part of the family, isn't she?" he said simply. "You take care of family." The simplicity of it, the absolute certainty, was what finally broke her. "And what about me?" The question burst from her. raw and wounded. Naruto turned, surprised by the raw emotion in her voice. Albedo, I am the overseer, she declared, tears welling in her eyes, her composure shattering. I am the one who was meant to stand by the side of the supreme beings. I am the one whose loyalty is beyond question. And yet, you look at her with such concern. You saved her, you hold her hand, and you look at me, and you see a soldier. A function. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. My love for Lord Ains is absolute. It is my core, it is my truth. But you have broken me, Naruto. You have shown me what it is to have a will of my own. And my will is drawn to you. It is a betrayal, it is a sin, and I cannot bear it. Before he could react, she fell to her knees before him, her head bowed. I am lost, I love my Creator, and I am falling in love with you. I am torn in two. I beg you, release me from this torment. Choose one of us. End this rivalry. Give me an order I can follow, even if it is to hate you. I can no longer live like this. Naruto stared down at the kneeling, weeping angel, his mind reeling. He had seen this before. He had lived this before. Sakura and Ino, the endless, pointless rivalry over Sasuke. He had seen how it had nearly destroyed their friendship. He refused to let that happen here. These women, Albedo and Shalltear, were the pillars of this place. Their rivalry, if all owed to fester into true hatred over him, would become a cancer at the heart of Nazarick. As he stood there, a second figure appeared in the doorway of the balcony, silent as a ghost. It was Shalltear. She was dressed in a simple silk nightgown, her face pale, but her eyes were clear. And they were filled with a desperate, possessive fire. He is mine, Shalltear said, her voice trembling but fierce. He saved me. He brought me back from nothingness. My life, my soul, it belongs to him now. You had your chance, Albedo. But I am the one he chose to save. I am his second in command. Albedo retorted, scrambling to her feet, her own pride flaring. It is my place to be by his side. Your place is wherever he tells you to be. Shalltear hissed, stepping onto the balcony. And he will be with me. They stood on either side of him. Two of the most powerful beings in the world, ready to tear each other apart over him. Their auras flared, Albedo's a vortex of unholy power, Shalltear's a wave of chilling vampiric might. The very air grew thick with their killing intent. Enough. Naruto's voice was a thunderclap. His own chakra exploded outwards, a massive, golden wave of pressure that dwarfed their own auras and slammed them back a step. It wasn't an attack, but a statement of absolute dominance. They both froze, their eyes widening in shock and fear. They had forgotten, for a moment, just what stood between them. Both of you, stop, he commanded, his voice cold and hard. You're acting like children. He looked from Albedo's tear-streaked face to Shalltear's possessive glare. He saw their pain, their confusion, their genuine, powerful feelings for him. And in that moment, a mad, insane, and utterly perfect solution bloomed in his mind. It was a plan born from the logic of a leader in the heart of a man who refused to let his friends destroy themselves. You want me to choose, he said, his voice softening slightly. You want me to end this? Fine. He took a deep breath. I'm not going to choose one of you. I'm choosing both of you. They stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. What? They said in unison. I won't be the reason this family tears itself apart, Naruto declared, his conviction absolute. Your strength lies in your unity. Divided, you are a weakness that our enemies will exploit. United, under me, you are an unstoppable force. He looked at Albedo. You are a brilliant commander. A devoted leader. Your heart is torn, but it is vast. You are more than your programming. He looked at Shalltear. You are a peerless warrior, fierce and proud. You have been to hell and back. And you are stronger for it. Your devotion is a weapon, and I will not see it dulled by jealousy. He stood between them, a pillar of calm strength. I will not have one of you as a subordinate while the other is a consort. I will not have one of you resent the other. If you are to be by my side, you will be by my side as equals. In all things, he let the silence hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final, world-altering blow. So, here's my decision. My order. My proposal. I will marry both of you. The silence that followed was so profound that Naruto could hear the faint, magical hum of the tomb's core. Albedo and Shalltear stared at him, their minds completely blank, unable to process the sheer audacity of what he had just said. Marry. Both of them. The concept was so alien, so far beyond the scope of anything they had ever considered, that it broke their reality. Naruto folded his arms, a small, determined smile on his face. We'll be a family. You, me, Albedo, Shalltear. The three of us. We will lead together. We will fight together. We will rule together. No more rivalry, only unity. That is my will. In another room, Ain's Gaon, W. Ho had been secretly observing the entire confrontation through a scrying spell, choked on air he did not need to breathe. The salaryman part of his brain was screaming in sheer, unadulterated panic at the social nightmare unfolding. But the guild master part of his brain, the cold, calculating strategist, saw the insane, terrifying brilliance of the move. It was a masterstroke. It would end the infighting. It would bind Naruto to Nazarick with the strongest vow possible. It would unite his two most powerful, and volatile, female guardians under a single, common purpose. It was political, romantic, and strategic genius rolled into one unbelievable package. Back on the balcony, Albedo and Shalltear were still staring, their expressions slowly shifting from shock, to confusion, to a dawning, incredulous understanding. A family, equals, married to him, together. It wasn't a victory for one over the other. It was a victory for both of them. It was a solution that didn't just end their conflict, it transcended it. A slow, radiant smile spread across Albedo's face, wiping away her tears. A hysterical, joyous giggle escaped Shalltear's lips. They looked at each other, not as rivals, but as co-conspirators, as partners. As sisters. I accept, Albedo said, her voice filled with a reverence that was no longer confused, but certain. I accept, Shalltear echoed, her voice a triumphant cry. Naruto let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He had just navigated a social and emotional minefield and somehow come out the other side. He had no idea how to plan a polyamorous wedding for two supernatural beings. But he had just saved his new family from itself. And so, under the swirling, magical nebula of the 9th floor, the foundation was laid for the most powerful in UNU. Seoul Alliance the new world would ever see. The great wedding of the Sun and the Supremes was no longer a question of if, but when. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Dual Throne. The declaration of the TR.IPLE wedding sent a seismic shockwave through the insulated, hierarchical society of the Great Tomb of Nazarick. It was an event so far outside the realm of established protocol, so fundamentally alien to the NPCs' understanding of their world, that it short-circuited centuries of ingrained dogma. And yet, because it was the will of a supreme being, too, in fact, as Ain's gave his immediate, if internally panicked, approval, it was accepted as new gospel. The preparations were a whirlwind of organized, fanatical chaos. Demiurge, ever the master strategist, immediately saw the political value. UBLIC wedding would be a phenomenal declaration to the new world. It would not just announce their power, but also their permanence. It was a symbol of creation, of dynasty, in a way a simple conquest could never be. He began planning a ceremony of such opulence and grandeur that it would be spoken of in hushed, terrified whispers for 1,000 years. The denizens of Nazarick threw themselves into the effort with a fervor usually reserved for war. Cocytus and his frost virgins carved intricate ice sculptures depicting scenes from Naruto's, mostly fabricated, glorious history with the other supreme beings. Aura and Mare used their druidic powers to grow a forest of otherworldly, bioluminescent flowers to adorn the grand arena on the 6th floor, where the ceremony would be held. The normally reclusive victim was even tasked with being the celestial ring bearer, an idea proposed by Shalltear that everyone found both morbid and strangely fitting. For Naruto, the period was a surreal blur of meetings, fittings, and awkward conversations. He found himself in the absurd position of mediating disputes between Albedo and Shalltear over everything from the color of the floral arrangements. Demonic black roses versus blood-red lilies, to the flavor of the towering wedding cake, a point they surprisingly agreed on. A decadent, rum-soaked confection with raspberry filling that looked suspiciously like blood. Their rivalry had not vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer a bitter, zero-sum game. Now, it was a competition to see who could be the better, more attentive, more supreme wife. It led to bizarre mornings where he would wake up to find Albedo silently organizing his entire wardrobe by color and tactical application, only for Shalltear to appear moments later with a rare, blood-infused coffee she had personally brewed, claiming it had revitalizing properties. Through it all, Naruto navigated the madness with a patient, weary amusement. He was a veteran of political theater and clan alliances. This was just a far more personal and dramatic version of it. In the quiet moments, he found himself genuinely connecting with them. He learned of Albedo's secret passion for domestic management, her dream of a smoothly running, efficient household that was a microcosm of a perfect kingdom. He learned of Shalltear's encyclopedic knowledge of poetry and literature, a remnant of her creator's personality that she rarely showed, finding a surprising intellectual partner beneath the vampiric predator. They were, he was discovering, more than just their titles or their power. They were people, complicated, flawed, and fascinating people. The wedding day arrived, a crescendo of pomp and circumstance. The entire population of Nazarick was assembled in the sixth-floor arena. The sky above was an illusion of a beautiful, sun-drenched day, a stark and deliberate contrast to the tomb's usual gloom, a concession Naruto had insisted upon. Ainz Ulgaon officiated, his role as the paternal head of their twisted family absolute. He stood before a grand altar, the staff of Ainz Ulgaon in his hand, a figure of ultimate authority. Naruto stood waiting, clad not in his usual tattered orange and black, but in formal robes of white and gold, bearing the Uzumaki swirl on his back. He looked every bit the solar regent, the living god among the unliving. Then they appeared. Albedo and Shalltear walked down the aisle together, a vision of dark and light. Albedo wore a breathtaking gown of midnight black silk that shimmered with captured starlight, her black wings unfurled. A crown of polished obsidian on her head. Shalltear was her perfect opposite, in a dress of the purest white, accented with crimson lace, her silver hair adorned with blood-red roses. They were the demon queen and the vampire princess, the shadow and the blood, come to claim the sun. They took their places on either side of him. The vows were not the traditional words of love and honor, but a declaration of a new kind of trinity. I, Albedo, overseer of the guardians, accept you, Naruto Uzumaki, as my husband and my lord, she declared, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. Your will shall be my will. Your enemies shall be my enemies. I vow to stand by your side, and by hers, to build an eternal kingdom upon this world. I, Shalltear Bloodfallen, guardian of the first, second, and third floors. Accept you, Naruto Uzumaki, as my husband and my savior, Shalltear vowed, her voice trembling with a fierce, possessive passion. My life, which you return to me, is yours to command. I will be your fang and your claw. I will fight beside you, and beside her, and all who stand against our family will drown in a sea of their own blood. It was the most terrifying and heartfelt wedding ceremony in the history of any world. When Naruto sealed the vows, not with a kiss for each, but by taking both their hands, a pulse of his golden chakra flowed into them, a tangi BLE connection that solidified their new bond. The roar from the assembled denizens of Nazarick was deafening. It was a celebration of power, of unity, and of the dawning of a new age. The founding the sorceress kingdom of Nazarick was as much Naruto's doing as it was Ainz's. While Ainz's overwhelming power, demonstrated by the massacre on the Cat's Plains, struck terror into the hearts of the world's leaders, it was Naruto's influence that shaped the kingdom's internal character. A new, dualistic structure was established. Ainz Ulgaon was the sorcerer king, the eternal, unliving god of magic and order. The symbol of absolute power that none dared to defy. His rule was one of fear, of consequence, of unyielding law. But beside him, Naruto Uzumaki was named the Solar Regent, the living protector of the kingdom's people. While Ainz remained an aloof and terrifying figure in the capital city of Irantel, Naruto, along with Albedo and Shalltear, walked among the populace. His clones became a common sight, helping rebuild crumbling infrastructure, reinforcing the city walls, and establishing fair and efficient distribution of food and resources. He used his sage art to sense out spies and saboteurs, his medical ninjutsu to establish public clinics that could heal any injury or illness, and his sheer charisma to quell the fears of the conquered human population. Albedo, in her new role as Queen Regent, proved to be an administrative genius, her mind a supercomputer of logistics and governance. She created a system of laws that was strict but fair, rooting out corruption with ruthless efficiency. Shalltear, surprisingly, found her calling as the head of the new royal guard. Her combat perfectionism translated into training the most elite, disciplined, and utterly loyal fighting force the world had ever seen. She took a sadistic glee in breaking down arrogant knights and remolding them into perfect soldiers, loyal not to a flag, but to the family that now ruled them. The world watched in a state of terrified confusion. Nazarick was supposed to be a kingdom of death and horror. Yet, under its rule, Erantel was flourishing. Crime had vanished. Poverty was being eradicated. The people were safe, healthy, and prosperous, living under a strange, dualistic reign of absolute fear and benevolent protection. It was a paradox that the other nations could not comprehend. But not everyone saw this as a new utopia. To the zealots of the Argent Crusade, it was the ultimate blasphemy. In a hidden sanctuary, a place outside the normal flow of time and space, Valerius Sunsworn knelt before a shimmering, formless entity, the Ethelian Weaver. The air hummed with its sterile, orderly power. The vampire failed, Valerius reported, his voice devoid of emotion. The abomination, the one they call Naruto. He possesses a power of life that counteracts the purification. He severed your connection. The Weaver did not speak in words, but in pure concepts, impressed directly into Valerius's mind. The anomaly is a cancer. A flaw in the pattern. It is chaos given form. The vampire was a test. A failed thread. It must be unraveled. The dual throne they have established is seducing the populace. Valerius continued. They offer safety and prosperity, a tempting poison that masks the filth of their unnatural existence. The people are beginning to accept them. The people must be reminded of what true order is. The cancer cannot be allowed to spread. It must be cut out. All of it. A torrent of pure, silver energy flowed from the Weaver into Valerius. His armor, still cracked from Naruto's blow, mended itself, becoming brighter, more radiant. His power, already immense, swelled to a cataclysmic level. He was no longer just a herald. He was an avatar. Gather the faithful. Gather the armies of the world. Show them the truth of the undead plague and its pet monster. Raise their city. Purify the land. I will grant you the strength to unmake their false god. Go. Be my sword. Valerius rose, his eyes burning with the cold, white fire of a dying star. It shall be done. The storm broke on a cool autumn morning. A coalition army, the likes of which had not been seen in centuries, marched on Erantel. At its core were the elite, silver-clad paladins of the Argent Crusade, their ranks swelled by tens of thousands of soldiers from the Re-Estais Kingdom and the Baharuth Empire. Coerced into the Holy War by threats and promises from the Crusade's new, terrifying leader. They were a sea of steel and faith, an army of over 100,000 strong. Come to cleanse the world of the Sorceress Kingdom. They halted a mile from the city walls. At their head, riding a magnificent winged griffin, was Valerius Sunsworn, his armor so bright it was painful to look at. He raised a hand, and his voice, magically amplified, boomed across the plain. People of Erantel, you live under the shadow of a lie. You have accepted the rule of death, the embrace of the unnatural. Your kings are a corpse and a demon, a plague upon this world. We have come not as conquerors, but as saviors. We have come to purify this land, to burn away the filth of the undead and their monstrous allies. Reject your dark masters, open your gates, and be reborn in the light of true order. His speech was powerful, filled with righteous fury. It sent a tremor of fear through the human population of the city. But on the walls of Erantel, the defenders did not flinch. Shalltear stood at the head of her royal guard, a cruel smile on her face. Albedo stood beside her, her expression one of cold, analytical fury, and in the center, flanked by his wives, stood Naruto. He looked out at the massive army, at the fanatical zeal in Valerius's eyes, and he sighed. He just doesn't get it, does he? He said, shaking his head. Shall I go down there and explain it to him, my love? Shalltear asked, her fingers flexing into claws. No, Naruto said. This isn't a fight for the soldiers. This is a fight between gods. He turned to his wives. You two handle the army. Show them why they shouldn't have listened to him. But don't go for slaughter. Break their morale. Make them run. They're just scared men following a madman. Albedo nodded, her expression grimly professional. And you, my husband. I'm going to have a final conversation with Mr. Shiny Pants. With that, he leapt from the high wall, landing softly on the field below. He walked out alone to meet the approaching army, a single figure in white and gold against a tide of steel. Valerius's eyes narrowed. So, the demon comes to meet its end. I came to tell you to take your army and go home, Valerius, Naruto said, his voice calm and carrying easily across the field. You're picking a fight you can't win. The Weaver has shown me your demise. Valerius roared, and with a cry, he urged his griffin into a dive, his silver lance leveled at Naruto's heart. This was the signal. The Argent Crusade charged, but they were not met by an opposing army. They were met by two women. Albedo shot into the sky, a black star against the sun. Ginnungagap, she roared, and a massive, swirling sphere of pure destruction materialized over the center of the enemy army. It did not explode. It simply erased everything it touched from existence, carving a perfect, circular hole hundreds of meters wide in the enemy formation. Thousands of soldiers simply ceased to be. At the same time, Shalltear charged from the gates. She moved like a red blur, her spewed lance a whirlwind of death. But she wasn't killing them. She was disarming them, shattering their limbs, breaking their spirits with contemptuous ease. She moved through their ranks like a storm, a force of nature that they could not even comprehend, let alone fight. The two queens of Nazarick were dismantling an army of 100,000 men by themselves. While his wives spread chaos and terror, Naruto faced his own opponent. As Valerius's lance descended, Naruto entered Six Paths Sage mode. His skin took on a golden glow, black markings appeared on his coat, and 9 truth-seeking orbs, spheres of black, malleable energy that could nullify all forms of ninjutsu and energy, materialized behind him. He didn't dodge, he simply raised a hand. One of the truth-seeking orbs shot forward, forming a small, black shield. Valerius's divine lance, a weapon that could pierce the hide of a dragon, struck the shield and disintegrated, its holy energy completely negated. Valerius stared in shock. Naruto appeared before him on the back of the griffin, grabbing him by the throat and hurling him to the ground. Naruto landed softly beside the crater where Valerius had impacted. The zealot climbed to his feet, bruised and furious. What is that power? The power of balance, Naruto said, his voice now a multi-layered chorus, resonating with cosmic energy. Something your Weaver, with its obsession with absolute order, will never understand. Valerius roared and drew his sword of silver light. He attacked, his speed and strength amplified to godlike levels by the Weaver. He was faster than a bolt of lightning, his every strike capable of leveling a mountain. The fight that followed was on a scale the New World had never witnessed. It was not a clash of swords, but a clash of concepts. Valerius's Argent energy, the power of nullification and absolute order, against Naruto's Six Paths Sage art, the power of life, creation, and the harmonious balance of all things. Every time their energies met, reality itself seemed to flicker and warp. The sky churned, the ground buckled. They were two gods warring for the soul of the world. But one was an agent, a vessel for a borrowed power. The other was the source. Naruto was always one step ahead. He used his truth-seeking orbs to form shields, spears, and platforms, effortlessly countering every one of Valerius's divine attacks. He wasn't just defending, he was analyzing, deconstructing Valerius's power with every exchange. Your power isn't yours, Naruto said, catching Valerius's blade between two fingers, the silver energy hissing and steaming. It's a parasite. It's eating you from the inside out. You think you're serving a god. You're just its next meal. Lies. Valerius screamed, pouring more power into his blade. The Weaver grants us perfection. There is no perfection, Naruto said, his eyes filled with a sad pity. There is only life. He twisted his fingers. The silver blade shattered into a million pieces. At the same time, he thrust his other hand forward, not with a Rasengan, but with a gentle tap on Valerius's chest. But this tap carried the full, conceptual weight of his own power. It wasn't an attack on his body. It was an attack on his faith. Valerius froze. The divine, silver energy within him did not explode. It simply unraveled. The connection to the Ethelian Weaver was severed. The borrowed power fled from him like air from a punctured lung. His radiant armor faded, turning into simple, mundane steel. The holy light in his eyes died, leaving only the terrified, confused eyes of a mortal man. He collapsed to his knees, weak and broken. The battle was over. Behind him, the coalition army, utterly shattered by Albedo and Shalltear, was in full, panicked retreat. Naruto stood over the defeated hero, the 9 truth-seeking orbs spinning slowly behind him. He could have killed him. He could have unmade him just as Valerius had tried to do to him. But that wasn't his way. It's over, Valerius, Naruto said, his voice returning to normal. Go home, and tell your God that its children want to be left alone. He turned his back on the broken man and began the walk back to his city, to his wives, to his family. He had won the war, not through destruction, but through an absolute demonstration of superior power and philosophy. He had not just defeated their enemy, he had dismantled his entire belief system, leaving him a hollow shell. It was a victory more total than any massacre. Chapter 6 End.